The anime starts off by showing that at the magic academy called Hardin, magical talent is everything. But there are always those people who just weren't born with that kind of gift. And right away, we see a swordsman going all out against some monsters in a dungeon. Then we find out that the guy's name is Will, who's the main character of our story. And to top it off, he's actually one of those people who doesn't know a thing about magic. Cut to the academy where Will is studying. The teacher calls him up to activate a spell on a stone. But since Will doesn't have any magic, everyone starts making fun of him. Edward tries to calm things down and says that Will is good with theory, but that doesn't help at all when it comes to magic. Then, this guy named Sion, who's super full of himself, casts a fire spell that explodes on the magic stone. Edward shuts Sion down and casts another spell, turning the stone into some kind of crystal. He takes the opportunity to lay it out. Magic rules everything. And in this world we're in, the teacher even humbly says that people like Will shouldn't even be at such a top academy because they'll never be better than the others. Later, after classes are over, Will gets hassled by Sion and a few other guys on his way out, telling him he should stop going to the dungeon just to earn a few measly points. That's when Colette shows up and starts defending Will because she thinks he's way nicer than the rest of the crowd. Sion, just to top it off in the worst way, says the title of mage is too much for him and takes off. Then the two of them start talking and Cole says he shouldn't pay attention to what they say, not to mention that the teacher went too far trying to humiliate him in class. Will, ever the charmer, thanks her and says he loves it when a beautiful girl like her stands up for him. The girl gets all flustered and asks if he says that to everyone, but Will swears he doesn't, that his parents always taught him to compliment ladies, and that he really does think she's very pretty. The girl almost has a meltdown but tries to keep her composure since she comes from a noble family. Suddenly, Will and Cole start staring at a protection spell that's up in the sky. Will starts explaining that a long time ago, some sinister villains had spread darkness throughout the kingdom, but then 5 wizards showed up, cast a protection spell, and wiped out the darkness, freeing everyone. He also says that these wizards were known as the Vandermages, which is basically the highest title for the most powerful mages in the kingdom. The girl asks if a mage named Alvis is watching them from the magic tower, and Will, ever the optimist, says yes. Then we meet Alvis, who's up in the tower, and there's a flashback to when Will was a kid. Will and Alvis had been best friends since they were kids and promised each other they'd become the most powerful mages so they could become Vanders. But that promise never really happened because the girl was insanely talented and became the youngest Vandermage in history. Unlike the main character, who's just an ordinary student with no magic at all, but still dreams of becoming a Vandermage. Back in the present, the magic teacher, Wagner, scolds Will, telling him to stop going into dungeons alone. Will gets really embarrassed and starts apologizing. Wagner says that, even so, he managed to defeat a monster, and that'll earn him 2 credits. Then Will and his little cat, Kiki, get super happy. Wagner also says that if he really wants to become a Vander, it's gonna be very complicated, because first he needs to get into the Advanced Institute and earn a bunch of credits. Not to mention he needs both theoretical and practical knowledge in magic. And since he doesn't have any magic, it's gonna be 10 times harder. Will tries to say that he'll do his best, but Wagner cuts him off, saying that without magic, it's almost impossible, and even adds that he doesn't even know if Will will graduate since he hasn't earned any credits in the exams. To make things worse, he warns that by the end of the week, Will needs to have at least 4 credits, or else he'll be expelled from the academy. The protagonist starts to panic, realizing he only has 2 days to do this, and begins reviewing the books to see which monster he can defeat to earn the credits. At that moment, the professor mentions that he thinks there's a monster called Baskerville on the 6th floor of the dungeon. Will gets super excited and thanks him for the information. But Sion was eavesdropping on the conversation and runs off to the place because he thinks that if he defeats the monster, Will won't get the points and he'll be able to get Will expelled from the academy. A long time later, Will heads to the dungeon all happy, thinking about facing Baskerville and earning the 4 credits. Kiki goes along, and Will tells him to watch out for the monster's fire breath. He also asks Kiki to help because it seems like the cat has a good nose for tracking monsters. Meanwhile, Cien and his crew are already in the dungeon. The guy's friends ask if he's sure about what he's doing. Cien, all full of himself, doesn't even answer, but thinks that someone like Will, who doesn't have magic, shouldn't even consider becoming a Vander. Suddenly, one of Sion's friends gets hit by the monster. Will hears the other friend's screams and rushes over there. When he gets there, Will sees that Sion is fighting an evil sentinel and is shocked to find out the monster is worth 10 credits. He thinks that this creature should be a few floors lower. Sion's magic doesn't even faze the beast. Sion starts to panic because he doesn't want to become just another statistic. But Will wonders if it's even worth saving the guy, since he's always giving him a hard time for not having magic. Then Will remembers his friend who said he was a kind person and always willing to help others. That's when she gave him the glasses he uses in battles. In the end, Will decides to put on the glasses and go on the attack against the monster, right when Sion was about to get roasted. The protagonist blocks the attack and thinks he's about to become a lone swordsman. Cut to another scene. Edward rushes in, desperate to tell Wagner that Sion and his students went into the dungeon. When he hears they're on the 6th floor, Wagner stays totally calm and tells him not to worry, because Will is there. Back in the action, Will is going all out with his attacks, and unlike Sion, is actually giving the monster a hard time. The two teachers are watching the fight through a magic orb, and Edward is impressed by Will's power. Wagner explains that Will's case is different from the others because even without magic, he has superhuman strength, not to mention the combat skills that make him a war machine. Suddenly, Will manages to cut off the monster's arm, the one holding the giant sword. Next, Will grabs the monster's sword, and the creature tries to attack with a powerful lightning strike, but Will blocks it and counterattacks with a slash that causes a massive explosion, taking the beast out for good. In other words, in a world full of magic, the protagonist is the toughest swordsman and warrior of them all. Right after, Will goes to help Sion, but the guy is super pissed off. Edward, of course, didn't like at all finding out that someone without magic could be better than him. The next day, even after getting chewed out by Wagner, the protagonist was praised because the monster gave him enough points so he wouldn't get expelled. Then there's a flashback to the day the protagonist entered the academy. People made fun of him, saying he was useless because he didn't have magic. Until one day, Wagner took him to Principal Cauldron and she gave him a dagger. Then she summoned several magical attacks and the protagonist managed to block them all. Seeing the kid's talent, she let him stay at the academy. At that moment, the protagonist asked if he'd ever be able to climb the tower to be with elves, and she said yes, but he had to keep his determination and be responsible. She gave the boy some hope, right? Back in the present, Wagner explains that to become a bender, you have two options: create a new spell or earn 7,200 credits at the academy. But he warns that a lot of people there are lazy and don't even study, so they might not even graduate, which means there'll be extra classes. A few hours later, Colette and the protagonist meet up and talk about how tough the class was. Suddenly, they hear some students saying that it was Cien who defeated the evil sentinel. But even Cien doesn't understand how the protagonist was the one who took him down. At that moment, he sees the protagonist walking by and goes over to confront him, super angry. But then Colette stands up for the guy and Cien ends up leaving. Meanwhile, Edward is furious with the principal, demanding that she expel the protagonist. But she says that at this point it's too late, since he's already in his 6th year and aside from the magic thing, he's an excellent student. She even says that maybe he won't become a bender, but he could be a healer or something else. Since the guy wouldn't stop talking about the protagonist, Cauldron suggests they give him a test, and she tells Edward himself to create it since he knows everything about bender magic. After all, Edward is known as the Dark Viper Mage. Back to the protagonist, he grabs his books and heads to the library to study history. And man, the guy is a genius when it comes to theory. His friend asks how he knows so much, and Will answers that if he loses even a single point, that's it. He won't get into a good college. The girl notices he's got a callus from studying so much, and she gets all worried, wanting to get rid of it for him. Then Edward shows up and tells Will to go to the spellcasting room right now. When he gets there, the protagonist thinks it's just some extra class, but the guy immediately launches an attack right next to him and says it's going to be a test because of his poor performance. He just has to land one hit to pass. And he even says that if Will passes the test, he'll earn 5 credits in spellcasting, but if he fails, he's out of the academy. Then we see that the protagonist really wants to stay at the academy. At that moment, Edward starts casting a dark magic spell on the protagonist. Switching scenes, Wagner is on his way to talk to Cauldron. She apologizes for calling him over and, without a second thought, creates a giant screen where you can see the protagonist and Edward fighting. She forbids him from interfering because he's the one who will decide the protagonist's future at the academy, and Edward was chosen for this test because he's one of the best at magic. Wagner says it's unfair and cruel that he was the one to do the test, because we find out that Edward is the mage closest to becoming a bender mage. Then we see that the protagonist can barely dodge the guy's attacks. He tries to get close to land a hit, but a magic barrier stops him. To make things worse, the protagonist takes a hit and thinks the teacher is really strong, because he doesn't even need to cast spells to attack. The protagonist gets nervous because the guy starts casting a spell called Dex Darby's Reign, which is a bunch of spells at once that are going to hit the protagonist like knives. He tries to dodge for a while, but ends up getting hit and feels powerless because he can't win. And he really wished he had his sword to fight. Switching scenes, we see Violetta super worried about the protagonist, thinking Edward must be making his life hell. And right at that moment, who shows up? Kiki, all beat up. The cat starts scratching at the protagonist's closet, and Violetta realizes she wants something in there and opens it to see what's up. Meanwhile, the protagonist is lying on the floor, and Edward throws out "being a bander is way too hard for you." He even adds that if the guy can't even beat him, imagine actually becoming a real bander. Even after being humiliated by the teacher, the protagonist doesn't give up and says he's going to become a bander. Yes, sir. He gathers what strength he has left and pushes the guy off him, and he even says that his motivation to become a bander is to be with the person he loves, which, everyone knows is Alves. This makes Edward boil with rage, calling the protagonist impure and saying he'll never be with her. That's when Violetta shows up and tosses the protagonist's sword to him, which had been stored in the locker. Will gets his confidence back, easily blocks with his sword. Then the teacher goes after the boy with everything he's got, and the protagonist compares himself to a dwarf warrior from the old days who managed to hit a mage, proving that you really can stand up to those who think they're superior. At that moment, the protagonist leaps into the air and, with a single strike, breaks through the barrier, leaving the two of them face to face. But in the end, the protagonist comes out on top because of a cut he makes on the teacher's cheek. Then Edward leaves, saying he earned 5 credits in sorcery. Meanwhile, in a parallel scene, Cauldron and Wiener are chatting about what happened because they couldn't believe what they saw in the fight. Wiener thinks the protagonist managed to break through the magic barrier and even attack the teacher from a blind spot. In other words, it's clear that the protagonist beat magic with his sword, showing that it can even overcome the magic of a wizard as strong as Edward. After that, there's a flashback to when the two friends said goodbye to each other. After giving her the glasses, the protagonist promises that he'll become a bander so he can watch the sunset from the tower, and the girl starts crying with happiness and says she'll wait for him. Back in the present, we see the protagonist delivering newspapers. He was just walking along when he tripped, but thanks to his skills, he managed to catch all the newspapers except one. Then he notices that his friend is on the front page and sees that she was the first person to invent 2 spells. But he also reads that the Higher Institute sent a mission to the protagonist's academy, and that mission came from Alvis herself. Right after that, the protagonist meets a guy named Rusty. He asks if the protagonist can create a magic item because he needs an ice core from the Frostwalkers. They need several magical catalysts, and he'll get paid if he manages to get them. We find out that Rusty really knows his stuff when it comes to making magic items, and he gives several to the protagonist before he leaves. Shortly after, the protagonist arrives at the dungeon and sees that there are a bunch of mages there. He thinks he wouldn't expect anything less from a mission coming from Alves, but then Sion shows up and takes out several guys with a single spell. He thinks the Frostwalkers are nothing to him compared to what the protagonist did the other day. Will starts running, because if he doesn't find any monsters, he'll lose the mission. The protagonist heads somewhere else and sees that a girl is in danger. He takes out the creature in a single blow. The girl thanks him right away and is surprised that he didn't use magic. She introduces herself as Iris. Switching scenes again, we go to the classroom, where Wiener is explaining that if someone creates a spell, it will probably be named after them, and they'll go down in history. Then, a student asks if Alves is amazing in that regard, and the teacher replies that there's no one in the world who has managed to create 2 original spells. That's why she's considered one of the best mages in the entire kingdom. Cole tells her friend Rose that she thinks it's amazing that she used to be friends with the protagonists when they were kids. Then Rose starts teasing her, saying she's jealous. Cole gets all flustered, but the teacher immediately tells them both to be quiet. Back to the protagonist, they're having a conversation and someone asks Iris if she doesn't hate him. The girl replies that there's no way she could hate the person who saved her. And even though he's known for not having magic, the girl says that everyone has their own gift. At that moment, the protagonist starts explaining that the world they live in is kind of fake, you know? Like, the mages put a seal in the sky to protect them from the darkness, so the sky they see is basically a magical creation. The thing is, they're hoping that one day they'll get to see the real sky. Iris interrupts his thoughts and says she had the chance to meet Alves. What happened was, Iris was in trouble in a dungeon, surrounded by monsters, and Alv showed up with ice magic and saved her. Iris gets all excited telling the story about her conversation with Alves because she's a fan of Alves, you know? And she's super grateful. That's why she's helping collect the catalysts. Suddenly, the main character notices something strange. Frostwalkers leave a trail of ice wherever they go, right? But the trail there was like twice as big as usual, so he immediately realizes there's a giant Frostwalker nearby. The main character takes off running in that direction, and Iris is left confused, wondering how he knows all this without having any magic at all. But he just replies that there are things you learn in theory, and that he's got the know-how when it comes to magical artifacts and dungeon knowledge. And once you know it, suddenly a giant Frox appears right in front of him, a super powerful creature. Iris hugs the main character, thinking that creature must be worth 6 credits, it's so strong. Then the beast attacks, but the main character pulls Iris to another spot and tells her to stay put because he's gonna take down the monster. But Iris warns him that physical attacks don't work on the big guy. The main character, totally confident, tells her to relax, that he's already taken out plenty of these before. The monster charges up a sinister-looking beam, but the main character is way faster and starts running circles around it. Then he starts attacking with one of the gadgets Rusty had given him. After running circles around the monster a bunch of times, he manages to neutralize its attack and sets the rope on fire, which burns all the way through, taking the monster out instantly. The main character is super happy because his friend's gadget worked perfectly. Meanwhile, Iris has a different look on her face, thinking that the rumors were true. She's thinking about how to give a uniform to someone else. Then the main character says he already has enough catalyst stones and that they can head back. A few hours later, we go to the tower where the Vanders are. We find out that Iris is part of this group and thinks that even without magic, the main character is incredibly skilled, a natural-born warrior. She walks into a room where all the Vander mages are gathered. First, we meet Carriot, and also Leonor, Tsue, and Alves. Iris apologizes for interrupting, but Carriot says they were just bored in a meeting anyway. The group comments that the beings from the sky are watching them, and if they're attacked, things could get really ugly. Leonor says they need more broths, I'm not sure what that is, for when the great day of destiny arrives, because they can't just let a prophecy run wild. Tsue asks Iris if she found anyone promising in the dungeon. She says that the guy who doesn't use magic was the best one she saw, but the group doesn't really agree with her. Leonor would never let inferior people get close to her. Tsue, on the other hand, thinks it could be fun and that the girls are close-minded. He even jokes, saying he'd accept a dwarf if he was useful. That creates some tension, but Carriot calms everyone down and says that the Magic Festival is coming up soon and then they'll decide what to do. After the meeting, almost everyone leaves, and Iris stays behind talking with Alves. Iris says the boy seems interesting, and Alves just creates a crystal, saying she's still waiting for the protagonist to come to her. A few days later, we see Colette and other students taking a practical exam, but the protagonist gets distracted by a guy's conversation and ends up getting hit. Then everyone makes fun of him for being a failure at magic. After that, another mage, Lyanna, does a combo with another guy named Weinel. Plus, another guy named Julius shows up who has ice magic, because these are the students who have more than 10,000 credits. After the exam, Julius shows up with Wine and Lyanna to declare war on them, because he wants to beat them. Just so you know, these are the students who have more than 10,000 credits, like points. When the exam ends, Julius goes up to Weinel and Lyanna to say he declared war because he wants to beat them in the next match. All of this is because they're getting ready for the Magic Festival, and so they can go to the Advanced Institute. Julius tries to cast a spell disguised as a flower, but the two of them blow it up right away. Everyone thinks the three of them are just too badass, the only ones there who have more than 10,000 credits. The main character explains that each person's credits are kind of like their resume for the Advanced Institute. But he doesn't even have enough to graduate, let alone go to the Institute. Will only has 5,404 credits, and he needs 7,200 to graduate and go to the Institute, you know? Then Julius shows up in front of the main character and treats him like trash. That's when the main character remembers that the Magic Festival's coming up. A little later, at lunchtime, Violet tells the main character that he should focus on other things. Usually, every student tries to show off with their spell to get recruited by the Institute. Then the main character starts explaining that the Magic Festival happens every 2 years at Haygarden Academy. There are a bunch of competitions at the festival, and the big shots from the Magic Tower always show up to recruit students. Then, while talking about Vandermagic, Mina interrupts the main character and reminds him that the tower has 4 factions: the Wand of the Lord of Thunder, the Wand of the Sacred Elf, the Wand of the Flame Emperor, and the Wand of the Ice Maiden. She says that if one of these factions picks him, like at the festival, he's already guaranteed a spot in the tower. Mina also says that there will be some guys called Watchers, like Iris, who will be looking for talented people while disguised as regular folks. She also tells the main character that if he takes part in the tournament, people will change their opinion of him, but he says he's just going to help organize the event. In the end, the main character says he doesn't want to participate because a few years ago he tried and totally messed up, ended up super embarrassed. Then the two of them see through the window that the students are already practicing their spells. Mina thinks the festival would be a good way for the main character to promote himself. Next, they head to the lockers. After helping the main character, Mina notices something, and Kiki undoes some spells that were on a locker door. Guess what? They find a secret staircase right there in the middle. When they get there, they run into a bunch of students making illegal bets. At that moment, Scion shows up, and Violet threatens him to stop bothering the main character. Scion's friend starts saying that he's worried about the top 3 students. That annoys him, but everyone hears it. In the end, Scion says he's just a little worried, but he knows that in practice, his level is the same as Weinel's and Leonis. Later, the main character finishes his classes and Kahlo invites him to go to the dungeon with her, but he has to work and says he can't. The girl gets really sad because she wanted to spend some time alone with him. At night, the main character heads to the outskirts of the city where the miners are. That's because his other job is being a waiter at a tavern. An old buddy of his says that life hasn't been easy for him since he knows he works as a newspaper delivery guy, a waiter at the tavern, and still studies. The main character replies that he has to hustle because he doesn't have a scholarship at the academy and needs to pay for his studies. The guy, let's call him Donin, says he should take part in the Magic Festival, but the main character gets nervous and says he's not going. And since the main character won't stop talking, the owner, who's pretty exploitative, tells him to work more and talk less. We see that Roast also works there, and the dwarves at the bar seem to really like the main character because he always treats them super well. After a few hours, Roast suggests that his co-worker ask Winner about a job because he doesn't make much money there. Then the main character says he's already gotten used to dealing with them, and then he gets along really well with Donan and the rest of the crew. He's being honest, knowing that the dwarves are honest people who love a birita and have always welcomed him with open arms, regardless of what he does or says. That's why he considers them amazing people and wants to continue the camaraderie. He even says he has the utmost respect for all of them. Right at that moment, a spoon falls to the floor, and who appears? Julius. The guy arrives with a super arrogant attitude, thinking the place is the epitome of low-class behavior. Seeing the protagonist working at the tavern, he starts mocking him, calling him incompetent. Donnan, seeing this scene, immediately starts glaring at the guy, but Julius tells him to stop staring like that because he considers dwarves an inferior race that came from another world. To make things worse, the guy sits there because there weren't any other open seats at that moment. The protagonist explains that, back in the day, the celestial beings destroyed the world the dwarves came from, and that's how they ended up in this world. But if a dwarf so much as touches a mage, their whole race pays the price. That's why there's all this heavy discrimination, and the guys won't stop making fun of everything. Even the food roast brings them. The protagonist is already fed up with hearing so much nonsense. He tells them to take back what they said about the food, because it was the dwarves themselves who planted and grew everything. Things get a little tense, but Julius says that everyone there has each other's backs. And to top it off, he does something that really pisses off the protagonist. He throws food on his shirt. Julius's friends try to step in, but in the blink of an eye, the protagonist knocks both of them out. Will comments that this hatred the mages have for the dwarves shouldn't even exist, because some mages are worse than animals. With a cynical smile, Julius thinks to himself that it had been a long time since he'd been humiliated like that. He warns that the protagonist just got himself into a huge mess for messing with someone like him. Then the guy pulls out his wand and starts freezing everything. Julius launches an attack at the protagonist, but he dodges it easily. But the guy keeps attacking and manages to trap the protagonist in some kind of ice crystal. He even creates an ice rose on the protagonist's chest to try to finish him off, but seeing the look of hatred in the guy's eyes, he reconsiders. So he challenges the protagonist to take part in the magic festival to humiliate him in public, and the protagonist, breaking out of the crystals, accepts the challenge. Then Julius says he's going to destroy what little reputation the protagonist has managed to build at the academy, but the protagonist counters, if he wins, Julius will have to apologize to Donan and the dwarves. Some time passes and we see the protagonist in the waiting room. It's the opening day of the magic festival. There are even recruiters keeping an eye on each participant to analyze them. Next up, the first game begins and it's an aerial one. Who wins? Leanna, of course. It's her second consecutive win in several years. The girl is a prodigy, no doubt about it. Meanwhile, Iris is over there talking to Cauldron, switching to her innocent girl persona, saying she needs to support someone. In another scene, Scion is with his friends, remembering that Colette invited him to join her group. The guy got all giddy thinking she was starting to like him, but when he gets there, he runs right into the protagonist. Colette explains that she invited him to the group because to participate in one of the games, they need to have at least 21,000 credits combined. And since the three of them together reach that amount, Scion feels used. He even refuses to help, but then Julius joins their team. Julius keeps staring at the protagonist and realizes that Colette actually has her eyes on the protagonist, not him. Colette immediately realizes that there was some drama between the protagonist and Julius because the category they're going to compete in is the same as his. And after a few hours, the event commentator announces that the judge will be Edgar. After a few words, he announces that the next event will be the main one, called Attack of the Crows, which is where the protagonist, Julius, and other teams will participate. At that moment, several elf girls cast a spell that transforms the whole place. Right then, the commentator tells it like it is. There are several playing fields that the elves created around the stadium, and anything goes inside during the competition. To make things clearer, the players start at different points and have to reach the central stadium. Whoever grabs the crown that's in the middle wins. And to make things even more exciting, the teachers set up some traps around, and the teams can attack each other as much as they want. In short, it's a crazy battle royale between the teams. The guy starts talking about the favorite teams, and Science's team isn't even close to being one of them, especially with Will, who doesn't have any talent at all. The crowd doesn't let up and starts making fun of Will, telling him to give up and calling him a total loser. The team gets ready, and Ogner gets all worked up seeing Will join in. He begs him not to go, but Will is determined to win. With that, he says, let's go, and leaves the teacher super worried, since he'd already warned him not to get involved in these games. And the tournament begins. Some robotic boxes come to life and turn into a bunch of golems. Will takes off at full speed, and everyone thinks he's running straight into the jaws of death. But suddenly, Colette uses an ability on Will, and they pull off a wicked combo, blowing up the golem in a single hit and leaving everyone stunned. Colette explains that even without magic, Will knows all the magical tricks thanks to the gloves he has. After that attack, he becomes the first to get past the golems. Meanwhile, Scion remembers everything that happened with Will and thinks he would have rather been roasted by the Sentinel than saved by Will. He trained like crazy to get strong, but Will just blew right past him, and now he feels totally humiliated. Back in the present, Will's group is leading the race and enters a desert area. Suddenly, they get attacked, but Colette casts a spell that makes it rain swords. Will takes advantage of it and throws each sword at the cubes that are shooting at them, destroying everything instantly. No one can believe that the guy without magic is in first place. Even the watchers are left speechless seeing how he spots every trap and either disables or blows them up right away. Edward explains that all this skill is because he's a dungeon rat, since if you remember, he used to live in the dungeons to make a little cash. Sirius is cheering for him from the stands. Meanwhile, the other teams are struggling with the traps, but Will is just showing off and cruising through the map with no problem. In a parallel scene, Julius is super worried because he hears the crowd in the stadium cheering way too loudly. He asks his teammates to check things out with their search abilities, and they tell him that Will is leading the race. He relaxes a bit and says he'll take care of it. Back to Will, they're attacked by some nasty traps that Edward set up, but Will manages to defend himself, which makes Edward furious because he didn't expect Will to get through so easily. Suddenly, the group enters a forest, and Will barely dodges a lightning bolt that Julius throws at him. Will gets really nervous because he didn't expect the guy to catch up so fast. His plan was to get there first and wait to attack, and he wonders why Julius is alone. Without thinking twice, he fires off several spells that attack Will like missiles. Will thinks the fight is about to go down right there, and suddenly there's a huge fire explosion because Scion showed up to lend a hand. Or at least that's what we thought, because Scion is furious, and Colette tells Will to run, since the guy is about to go all out and attack his own teammate. Will manages to protect himself with an earth shield that he pulled out of who knows where. After the attack, Scion says that actually, the attack was meant for Julius, to get him out of the way, but it was so strong it opened up a path of fire. Scion admits he pushed Julius aside so he could have a fight with Will, because he's bitter about being outdone by Will's talent. Will can't even believe he's hearing these words from his own teammate. Talk about awkward, since they're supposed to be a team, right? But Scion, out of nowhere, launches an attack at the protagonist, saying he's a despicable person and that he doesn't need any more reasons to take him down. Colette tries to step in to defend him, but Julius creates an ice barrier, stopping her from getting close to help the protagonist. To make things worse, he even charges up an attack that hits the girl, and the protagonist sees everything but can't do anything because he's being attacked himself and his sword gets knocked far away. Then Will says they can't be fighting like this, since they're on the same team and need to win the tournament. But Scion is blinded by rage and just wants to fight the protagonist to get revenge for the humiliation he made him go through. Then there's a flashback to the protagonist's first year at the academy. We see that the boy felt really bad, rejected by everyone, and Scion tried to make him his subordinate so he wouldn't feel so down. But the protagonist just ignored his words because he was feeling too awful. He saw that Scion only thought about going to the tower, and because he was rejected, Scion has hated him ever since that day. Back in the present, the guy keeps attacking the protagonist with all sorts of fire magic. Since the protagonist just keeps dodging the attacks, Scion gets furious and tells him to fight back too. But Will says he won't do that because they're on the same team, and also because he promised something to Donan and Vesto from the dwarves. Hearing that, Scion says that in that case, he'll finish him off and turn him to ashes. Meanwhile, the crowd watching is left speechless seeing teammates going at each other like that. Edward even comments that they should focus on getting the crown and that this ugly fight is gonna look bad for both of them because the Watchers will see it as a negative and won't want to recruit them for the Magic Tower. And sure enough, the recruiters end up disappointed with Scion. The guy was in the top 4 with the most credits at the academy and threw it all away with that attitude. Meanwhile, Iris shows up with Rusty, and the two of them start chatting about the main character. Rusty never imagined that she'd be rooting for someone like him, especially since there's so many favorites among the competitors. Back to Colette, she's thinking about how to stop her teammates. But Julius is there, getting in the way of her plans. Suddenly, the girl takes a hit, but she still manages to block it. But she falls into a trap the teacher had set, and there's a huge explosion. Then, out of nowhere, everyone in the stadium is totally confused because they start seeing a bunch of Juliuses all over the place. Turns out, he came up with a secret technique to multiply himself and go after the rest of the opponents. We see him get close to Wilnod, but the guy destroys the clone with a single attack. He releases some kind of crystal, and the guy thinks Julius must be really skilled with that secret technique, since only a mage bander could pull off something like that. The commentator, seeing that Julius is out, is impressed by the power of the elves. Switching scenes, we see 2 elves named Phoebius and Lefia who are watching the fight closely. Both of them think that, despite the good performance in combat, everything is just too normal. They decide to leave because they're not really into festivals and are even thinking about writing a report for Eleanor. Meanwhile, Scion's teammates are furious with him. They can't believe they were winning, and he went and did something like that, attacking his own teammate? Even though Scion doesn't like the protagonist because he doesn't have magic, they think everything he's doing to try to get the guy kicked out is really messed up. Back to the protagonist, he's feeling kinda tired and wondering why Scion is so obsessed with him. Then there's a quick flashback of the protagonist. Many years ago, he and his friends used to mess with the protagonist, throwing his books away and other stuff like that. And Will knows better than anyone that he's a failure and doesn't need to do these things to show off, because all of this just makes him feel worse than he already does. The protagonist even thinks that if he were in Scion's position, he wouldn't be so selfish. But right after, the protagonist remembers that he can't take his eyes off the goal because he needs to win so he can go to where Alvis is. Back in the present, Scion starts casting a sinister fire spell to finish off Will. He summons a Guardian Falcon, kind of like a Fire Phoenix, which is a Guardian level spell, and sends it up. The protagonist thinks about cutting off its wings to attack the guy, but the Falcon regenerates and comes at him again. Then Will realizes he needs to destroy the creature's core. He also realizes that these Guardians are used to buy time and cast other spells. After defending against the attack, everyone is left speechless by the summoning. Even Edward thinks the spell is way too advanced for a student. The recruiters start talking and think he's reaching Liana's level, and the top 3. They even agree that the festival is great for seeing everyone's potential. One of them decides to write a report to Cario, saying there are some good students this year. Back to the main character, he says they need to stop fighting and mentions that Scion has gotten a lot stronger. Scion replies that they have to fight because he spent his life being humiliated by Will and doesn't understand how the guy doesn't hate him. But Will says that he does despise him, and that he even thought about cutting him off, but now he's focused on beating Julius and doesn't have time for that. Scion gets furious and says that just looking at his face already pisses him off. That's because the main character never gave up, even after everything that happened. And to everyone's surprise, Scion admits that Will always ignored him, unlike everyone else, and that all he really wants is the guy's attention. Then the main character realizes that he just wants to be taken seriously. So he says that if Scion wants his presence that badly, then they need to fight with everything they've got. Scion realizes he finally got Will's attention and summons the Fire Falcon again. The main character knows the Guardian won't let him get close that easily, but suddenly, Scion throws the Falcon and combines it with several divine-level spells. And Will gets tense seeing that super powerful double attack coming his way. But the main character already knows how to win. He dodges the Guardian, destroys the core, and charges straight at Scion. But out of nowhere, Violet shows up and creates an earth barrier, making the main character run right into it. She tells him to stop, saying he hasn't beaten Julius yet, but the guy has disappeared. Scion gets super worried about Violet's clothes and says that a noble like her shouldn't be dressed like that. But she says it's his fault for starting a fight with the main character. Violet tells Will to go on and settle things with Julius. Scion tries to say something, but Violet cuts him off and tells him to stop interfering. And being the obedient guy he is, he has no choice but to listen. The main character thanks her, and she blushes. So deep down, she liked it. She even says that he can fight Scion another time. At that moment, the main character flies off, and we see Julius entering the stadium. Everyone thinks his team has already won, but suddenly the main character falls from the sky, making a huge crash. Will says it's time to fight, and Julius is happy because he's going to get to humiliate him in front of everyone. In a parallel scene, Albe is relaxing by the window in the tower, but then an assistant from the Ice faction, Maris, shows up and gives her a smack on the head to wake her up. Maris says that all she does is sleep and look down at the world from above. Then the girl hands her a paper with the top candidates for the Ice faction, and Julius is in first place. Maris tells Alba to consider making him her successor as Bender. Back to the protagonist, the mood is tense, and Julius thanks him for coming since he was bored and wants to beat him up and humiliate him once and for all. But the protagonist replies that he won't lose until Julius apologizes to Donnan and the rest of the dwarves. So Julius, without thinking twice, creates a smokescreen with his ability to attack the protagonist without any trouble. But the protagonist is able to sense Julius's presence when he attacks, but just as he finds the guy, he gets hit. The protagonist is stunned to see that right in front of him, Julius starts summoning a bunch of clones of himself. The clones charge forward and immediately start freezing the protagonist's body. Edward got nervous right away because he knows that this cloning spell isn't that easy to pull off. Meanwhile, Warner thinks this ability is called Glossfraw and that it comes from the secret magical arts created by Alves, and it's not nearly as easy to replicate as the guy is making it look. To make things worse, this ability is one of the 2 spells we mentioned earlier. The protagonist asks how he can use Alves magic, and the guy thinks he just studied and has pure talent. He even mocks the girl, saying that one day he'll surpass her and make her look ridiculous in front of everyone. Then the protagonist gets annoyed and, after breaking the crystal, charges at the guy. But the clones start attacking right away, and he has no choice but to block their attacks. Julius says that the clones can move as if they think, just like him. Suddenly, they stop attacking the protagonist, and we see that after turning into lightning, they trap him in some kind of cage. He tries to break the cage, but it doesn't do any good. And to finish things off, Julius summons a giant crystal that hits the protagonist dead on. Everyone is shocked by the guy's insane power. Edward thinks he won without even moving from his spot. Julius, all full of himself, starts talking to the recruiters, thinking that with Alva's magic, he proved he's way superior and could be the girl's successor. Everyone starts applauding him, and Iris thinks he managed to fool the protagonist, even though he's skilled. So she thinks he's a real strategist. But suddenly, Julius is stunned when he sees the protagonist break free from the crystal with a single slash. He can't believe the guy tanked such a powerful attack. The protagonist thanks him, saying he was able to keep a cool head because Julius insulted Alves. Then he decides to attack again, but the protagonist, using his insane speed, takes out Julius's teammates with a single blow. Edward realized that he used the same strategy of hiding and finishing off his opponents like he did with him. And we see that Julius's clones disappeared because the protagonist was using them as support for his own teammates. In the end, he mocks Julius, saying that he can only use a crumb of the real power that Alves has. Those words make the guy really pissed off. Meanwhile, Alves tells Maris that Julius could be a good successor, but the person she wants by her side is the best swordsman there is, which is clearly the protagonist. Back to the protagonist, he says that even though he can use the cloning ability, it's not perfect because he has to use magic the whole time. He was only using his companions because, honestly, he hasn't even perfected the technique yet. This makes Julius even more irritated, and he summons an ability and brings out several clones again. He also summons some spells from the sky, which the protagonist dodges easily while avoiding the attacks from the clones. Julius thinks the protagonist has a bit of a point, because for now he can only create 4 clones and he'll never know which one is the real one, since they all look exactly the same. And he figures that for now, he'll have to stay on the defensive. But suddenly, the protagonist finds the real one, and when he charges at him, Julius can barely manage to create an ice shield. Even so, the protagonist manages to break the shield and hurts him badly. Julius asks how he knew it was him, and the protagonist answers that it's because of the clone's temperature. Since he hasn't mastered the technique, they give off a bit of smoke, like they're letting out cold air. Julius gets really upset and asks how someone without talent like him could know this spell better. The protagonist tells him and Alves that they were childhood friends, like they grew up in the same orphanage, so he knows the girl's magic better than anyone. Everyone is left speechless, and the protagonist admits that he knows all the strengths and weaknesses of his friend's magic. Those words drive the guy crazy since he thinks a bender spell could never be beaten by someone without talent like Will. Then, the protagonist takes the guy's spell, but he blocks it easily. That's when Julius falls to his knees knowing he lost. The protagonist praised him, saying that even though he wasn't superior, he was the first mage to manage to copy his friend's magic. He even mentions that she created this clone ability when she was just 2 years old. Everyone was shocked, and the protagonist even says that because of this, the magic isn't perfect and has its weaknesses. Those words really hit the guy's ego because in the end, the protagonist basically said he was at the level of a 2-year-old child. That makes the guy laugh, and suddenly he charges up all his magical power, creating twice as many clones as he had summoned before. Now he's determined to humiliate the protagonist with everything he's got. But then Will says that's nothing to him because his friend used to annoy him by making up to 10 copies of herself. That made the guy even angrier, and he started attacking the protagonist with everything he had. But Will started moving from side to side, taking out all the guy's clones one by one. After a few seconds of wiping out the clones, he finally managed to take them all down and land a punch on the real one, smashing him into the wall and knocking him out. Everyone in the stadium was left speechless, watching the protagonist take out one of the top 3 students without using any magic at all. That's when Violet came running over, super happy about what had just happened. Even Leanna was impressed by the protagonist's talent and power. But then came the surprise. Even though he had beaten the guy, the protagonist ended up losing. Right then, Will showed up and, without saying a word, grabbed the crown like nothing had happened, making his team win. You could say Will was the smartest of them all, waiting for everyone else to fight it out so he could grab the crown. Meanwhile, Sarisa tells Alves that the crawl attack is over, but Alves seems nervous after hearing everything the protagonist said about her when they were kids. She's dying of embarrassment and has no idea what to do to turn back time. Back to the protagonist. He's a bit upset about losing, but then Violet comes over to comfort him. Even so, the protagonist feels like he managed to keep the promise he made to Donan. Later that night, everyone is at the tavern celebrating the protagonist's fight. Steiner even thanked the dwarves for taking such good care of Will. And after a few hours, Donan asks the protagonist if he got recruited for the tower. But Violet says no, because he didn't win. And she's still mad because it was all Cyan's fault. She even says they invited him to celebrate, but he turned it down. Donan also thinks he managed to beat Julius, and he ended up apologizing, but they made him work washing dishes, because that's how dwarves accept apologies. Julius was desperate since he'd never worked before. Ku asks the professor if it was a good idea to throw this party after the fight. He replies that they've already done the hardest part, which was showing their talent in combat, so now they just have to wait until tomorrow. Koryo asks if they're gonna treat the protagonist better now because of the power he showed. The professor confirms and hopes he'll have a much better life than he used to, since he was always looked down on by everyone. The next day, the protagonist goes back to the academy and everyone is getting ready for dungeon training. People started inviting the protagonist to join their groups since everyone saw how badass he is. A bunch of guys came over and started arguing about who would get Will on their team. Violet got annoyed seeing that they were all pestering Will to have him in their group, so she stepped in and reminded them how they used to treat him before. The protagonist was super happy to see that now he was liked and had friends. But then one of the girls grabbed the protagonist's hand and told Violet not to be so selfish. Violet was furious seeing someone touching the protagonist, so she pulled him away from the girl and said they already had a date. Later that night, Violet thought she had gotten carried away and now didn't know what to do about the date she had with the protagonist. Then Rose showed up and started teasing her. Rose said she needed to get ready so she wouldn't disappoint the protagonist, and even said that if she dressed up, the rumors might actually come true. Meanwhile, Rost was talking to the protagonist and asked if he was going to the dungeon tomorrow. The protagonist plays dumb and says that actually he has to go out with Violet to buy some stuff he needs. The next day, Violet gets all dressed up, thinking that even if it's not a date for the protagonist, she's gonna make it one. Right then, Will shows up and says she looks beautiful, totally different from how she usually is. He even says, "My heart started racing just seeing you." The girl gets super nervous, but then Ross shows up and ruins everything. He introduces himself to Violet and immediately says he's coming along for the shopping, ruining her plans on the spot. The protagonist says he invited him, since Ross had asked the night before, right? That's when Ross grabs the protagonist's hand and Violet is totally confused because real friends don't do that kind of thing. And the rest of the day was Violet trying to get closer, but Ross wouldn't let the protagonist breathe, like he was seriously crushing on him. Violet was thrown off because she wanted some alone time with the protagonist. After a long while, Violet asks the protagonist who Rost is, since he didn't leave his side for a second, and asks if he's some girl or something like that. The protagonist says he's a guy, and she knows that because they're so close they've even taken baths together, and his sword is bigger than Ross. And to make things even weirder, Win comments that Rost has always been like that. Then he brings some drinks, but only two, because one is for Violet and the other they're gonna share. At that point, they tell the protagonist to go sharpen his sword with the dwarves, because wizards aren't welcome there. He agrees and heads to the forge. Violet takes the opportunity and asks Ross directly if he has stronger feelings for the protagonist. Ross stands up and, in a kind of threatening tone, says that no one loves Will more than he does. And then they start arguing about who is the protagonist's best friend. To top it off, Ross says, "At least I've taken a bath with him." Meanwhile, the protagonist thinks the two of them are acting really weird. At that moment, Liana shows up and asks to have a word with them. She asks him to go with her, and they arrive at a house where the rest of the top people from the academy are hanging out. Once they're there, Liana explains that at the end of the semester, there are some group activities, and she wants the 5 of them to form a team to complete the dungeon. The protagonist immediately gets nervous because he knows that Sion and Julius hate him, and the two of them already start complaining to Liana for bringing him along. Sion gets annoyed because the protagonist ignores him, but Ignal uses an illusion spell to calm everyone down and asks them to at least listen to the proposal. Liana explains that with his talent, he could be useful in the dungeon, but the other two refuse to work with the protagonist no matter what. Then the protagonist gets down, seeing that he's being rejected again, unlike Ignal, who seems to be a nicer and more understanding guy. He even thinks the two of them are losers who haven't gotten over their defeat. And he even says, "You shouldn't underestimate someone who beat you so easily, proving that my sword is better than your wands." To top it off, he says that even though the protagonist has fewer credits than Liana, he respects her decision to add him to the group. Unlike the dummies, Liana plays it straight and admits she wants to use them to get famous and climb the tower, since she didn't get a good spot in the festival for some reason. And she goes on to say that they don't care about the academy and that she sees them as inferior. That's why, coming from an important family, she always has to achieve great things and wants to become a magic bender. She knows that everyone there has the same ambition, so she asks for their support because no one else understands the drive to reach that level. After the conversation, they agree. They'll help out. Right after that, the main character goes back to his friends and tells them he's going to do the practicals with Liana's group. The next day, the teacher announces that deeper levels of the dungeon will open in 10 days. That way, you can earn up to 1,000 credits just by taking down the guardians on each floor. And Edward even warns everyone that things could get ugly, like actually dying, because in previous years, some creepy monsters swallowed up 4 students. Even with the teachers keeping an eye on the dungeons, there's no way to prevent every accident that might happen. A few days go by, and the group is ready to take on the dungeon, and Violet tags along uninvited, telling Liana that wherever the main character goes, she'll follow. In the end, the teachers announce that there will be safe camps on each floor in case anyone needs help, and with that, they officially kick off the training, which will last a week. Cut to another scene, and a guy tells Kiriat that the students' training has started. The guy seems to be waiting for someone because he says the sky barrier is almost closing. Back to the protagonist, the group takes off like a rocket and jumps off a cliff, but magic saves them before they fall, and they come face to face with a creature that looks like a praying mantis, along with an army of insects. Then the protagonist thinks he should act as a shield for the mages, but Inu stops him because Liana starts fighting hand-to-hand and completely wipes out the creatures. Gwenelle comments that in the Owens house family, she's an exception for fighting like that. Mina, all confident, thinks they need to move forward as quickly as possible because the credits aren't that important. Then there's a flashback to when the professor was giving Wynne some advice. Wagner had said that the most important magic in a dungeon is search, to sniff out any enemies. And back in the present, the protagonist doesn't sense the presence of a boss, and just as Junis barely manages to defend him, Inel already gets nervous, because without magic, it's tough for him to track down enemies. They take down a bunch of monsters, and Inel thinks the protagonist is weaker than he expected, telling Liana that maybe she was wrong about him. The girl, totally chill, says maybe it's because he hasn't had a chance to act as a shield yet. But when they get to a lower level with stronger enemies, he'll show what he's made of. On the other hand, the mages can use their wands to absorb the magic that monsters release when they die, unlike the protagonist, who has to carry a piece of the monsters to prove they've been taken out. Then the protagonist realizes that everyone else is just killing the monsters and he can't do anything, and he feels kind of like a lost backpacker in the group. After a whole day in the dungeon, Liana thinks they should stop to rest, so Enel creates an illusion in a spot where there are some creepy flames to keep the monsters away. Next, the protagonist starts handing out some food rations, but Gwenelle would rather he just leave it on the ground, because for an elf like him, being touched by someone unworthy is an insult. Colette tries to stand up for the protagonist, but the guy says he only considers Liana worthy. The protagonist tells her to chill, because he understands that elf culture is really different from that of mages. The protagonist thinks that elves are similar to dwarves because they're talented and come from a culture where they only see value in certain people. And their pride comes from Eleanor, who is the queen of the elves and one of the magic benders. At that moment, one of the girls says she'll cover up the trail they left behind and mentions that the group's goal is to take on some monsters called Luminous Navarus, which are worth 110 credits, and there's only one in the whole dungeon. They're all super determined to take it down, but she says that people who've tried before usually give up, so it's kind of like a final boss or something. Liana admits that she put the group together to take down this monster. That way, she can show the tower what they're capable of. In the end, Mina says they're going to avoid fighting to save their magic and look for the shortest path to the 10th floor of the dungeon. The main character thinks that even though he only earned 5 credits today, he's kind of freaked out by the idea of a boss like that, but he knows he has to face it if he wants to see Alviz. In a parallel scene, 2 shady guys are staring at a professor's decapitated head. One of them says he made the guy go through hell. Back with the group, they kept going and made it to the 10th floor. But they ran right into a pile of monster corpses. They started wondering if another group had come through before them, but the main character thought there were no signs of magic or brute force used to take out the creatures. They reached the boss room and realized someone had taken out the monster just a short while ago. They decided to use search to check out the area. At that moment, the main character remembered the teacher saying there's a monster that can escape search. Back in the present, the main character looks up and suddenly, a giant monster starts charging up a super powerful lightning attack. The main character barely manages to block the attack, but Yunali gets the worst of it. Everyone starts attacking the monster right away, but it creates a huge hole in the ground. While everyone is falling, the main character decides to help Yunali. Since he's unconscious, even the people on the first level of the dungeon feel the place shake. After falling, the main character realizes he's no longer in the Academy's territory. He ended up right on the 11th floor. Julius and Sam are tense too, since from the 11th floor on, the levels belong to the tower members, who are basically the bosses, just as strong as the Vanders, who can go to such a dangerous place. Meanwhile, Liana is hurt and thinks they literally fell into hell. Colette comes up to her and thinks they need to regroup with the rest of the crew. Otherwise, things could get ugly. Next, we see Gunari dreaming about the elves treating him like trash because he thinks it's shameful to serve a bunch of half-baked mages. Right then, he wakes up and sees that the main character has taken down a giant snake. The guy gets nervous when he sees that the main character defeated the monster by himself, but since he tried to help, Gunari got pissed and told him not to touch him. Willie replied that Even though he hated him, he wasn't going to leave him there and wanted to heal the wounds on his arm. But Ginali would rather heal himself. And the main character thinks that since the supplies were split among everyone, they have to find a way to meet up in less than 24 hours. Junali says they should wait for a rescue, but the main character thinks it's better to look for their friends, because with a monster like the one that attacked them on the 10th floor, it's going to take a long time for anyone to help. In a parallel scene, a girl named Elisa tells Weiner that the 8th floor was attacked. To make things worse, a creature ripped off the heads of several members, so she doesn't know if anyone survived the monster invasion on the 9th floor. Weiner thinks that if someone killed Academy professors, it's very possible that all of this was planned by someone. At that moment, Edgar shows up and says they have to cancel the training sessions because all the students are in danger. Back with the protagonist, they keep walking, and Cunali gets mad at the protagonist because he asked him to stop using search. Gianali says they need to stay alert so they don't get ambushed again, but the protagonist, totally calm, says that he and Kiki can track nearby monsters and take out the ones that search doesn't catch. Gianali says he doesn't understand how he can stay so calm in a situation like this. And Willie says it's because he had to work hard to earn credits in the dungeon, so he could keep studying. The two are interrupted when Kiki signals to the protagonist that something's coming, and suddenly they're surrounded by several demon orcs, which the protagonist immediately starts killing. Yunali thinks that the protagonist turned a lot of unknown knowledge into something familiar, thanks to Theory, and understands how he really became so strong. Suddenly, one of the orcs is about to attack Yunali, who tries to cast illusion magic, but it's useless. It doesn't work because the orcs are blind and track by smell. Seeing that the monster is about to kill the guy, the protagonist comes flying in and saves his companion with a single blow. Next, the protagonist tells Gunali not to worry about it because he respects him and knows he's talented. But Gunali, looking a bit sad, says he thinks he's useless and a real outcast. At this exact point in the anime, they don't explain what that means, but that's what he says. Right after, they show a memory of Gunali training alone. Even though he wasn't on Vander's level, he worked hard every day to be like Eleanor. Back in the present, Ginao opens up to the protagonist and tells it like it is. He's the only elf left at the academy after 6 years. Everyone else always climbed the tower, and to make things worse, a lot of people treat him like the trash of the elves. Guy now also admits that to be on the same level as the other elves, he should be able to create real illusions, like the arena in the magic tournament. But unlike them, he can only create illusions that don't actually affect anything, that are only good for distracting enemies. Even so, the protagonist thinks he's got some serious talent, but Ginao throws back in his face what the girl had said, that the academy students are like the masterpieces of the group. Meanwhile, Leanna explains the same thing to Call. The truth is, she's only popular at the academy because the tower only values people who stand out in something important, like creating new spells, just like Alvis did. Leanna says she was even classmates with Alvis, but since the girl was more talented, she moved up really fast. Back to Well, Ginao drops a bomb that leaves him stunned. Just like the protagonist, he grew up with Eleanor and was always totally into her. He thought they'd be together forever until the day they found out she had the power to create the King's Forest. Then the important people separated the two of them because she became a Vander. Since then, he's been killing himself trying to catch up to her, but so far he just feels like crap for not being able to climb the tower. At that moment, the protagonist gets all happy and says that now he gets it. He felt like something connected the two of them, because they both went through something similar with their crushes. Winnan asks him to leave and let him be, but the protagonist, who has a huge heart, says he's going to take care of him until he gets better, because he knows Winnan is a badass mage. After a long time fighting some tough monsters, Windun gets impressed by the protagonist's skill and realizes he's only getting beaten up because the protagonist is there, protecting him. He even asks why the protagonist doesn't just leave like everyone else did to him. But the protagonist tells him straight, it's because he knows Windun is a good guy. Suddenly, Kiki warns that something's coming, and Ginao, using search, realizes he can't detect any monsters. Then the group gets closer and sees that they're creating monsters inside the dungeon. And they manage to create some wicked fire monsters called Tauros Navage. Bull says each one is worth 11 credits and that the tower considers them super dangerous. Their physical strength and insane resistance to magic make them seriously overpowered creatures. But the protagonist says the only thing that works on them is the elves' illusion magic. But Gino feels bad because he knows his magic is pretty weak. With tears in his eyes, he tells the protagonist that he knows he's useless, but the protagonist gives him some encouraging words, saying that everyone makes mistakes to learn. Then Gino realizes that even though they share the same dream, they're really different. Suddenly, the creatures attack the protagonist, who tries to take him down but can't. Ginao tries to use his illusion magic, but it doesn't work at all. At that moment, the creatures launch a coordinated attack that hits the protagonist head on. Even so, he gives him some motivational words to try again and says he believes in him. Right then, the guy gets a huge morale boost, because even if his own people don't believe in him, the protagonist does, and that's enough for him to keep going. He won't let down the trust the protagonist is putting in him. Then Gino casts his illusion magic and attacks the monsters with some real roots. And after taking them out, the guy kneels in front of the protagonist, apologizes for having treated him badly up until now, admits that he's a badass mage, and offers him his respect. The protagonist says he always saw him training and really admires him a lot. Then Ginel puts his pride aside and the two shake hands firmly. Right after that, the protagonist uses a magic artifact to track the group, and Kiki remembers the other's scent and starts guiding them. Meanwhile, Sion and Julia start arguing until they suddenly hide. Sion remembers that demons can't be tracked by search, and right at that moment, a bunch of evil sentinels show up. Sion musters up his courage and tells Julius to make a bunch of clones to act as decoys because he's determined to take out all those guys. Then he's able to summon his fire guardian, and in a parallel scene, we see the students running away from the evil sentinels. Edgar manages to protect a student who is about to get roasted, and after saving the guy, he jumps onto a monster controlled by Wonder, and the two of them make a run for the 10th floor, which was already where the protagonist group was headed. To top it off, Wonder says that Kiki and her sphere are connected, so she realizes that actually they're on the 11th floor. Meanwhile, Leanna is feeling really bad because all of this is happening because of her ambition, but Colette gives her some encouraging words, saying it's not her fault since she wasn't even invited to the group and tagged along with them anyway. Back to the protagonist, they sense some magical presence, and when they arrive at a certain place, they run into Sion and Julius again. Everyone is happy to see each other, but at the same time, they're worried because the girls are still lost out there. In a scene change, we see that someone approaches the girls, and it's the decapitated guy. To top it off, another mysterious guy shows up, and we find out his name is Marcy, and the headless guy is called Headless. Marcy comments that, apparently, the Duke he left to finish them off failed his mission since they weren't supposed to find out the two of them were there. The girls ask who they really are, and they answer that they're the classic villains who show up because they want to destroy the fake sky the wizards created, referring, of course, to the protection spell they had cast. Without thinking twice, Headless sends a slash of darkness to try to cut off their heads, but right at that moment, Will shows up and blocks the attack. The protagonist tries to attack too, but takes a direct hit, and the group covers for him so he doesn't get too hurt because Headless, even without a head, is obsessed with taking theirs. But since other people are starting to show up, Maria says they need to get out of there. Then Headless starts writing words in the air, and while being dragged away by Maria, he begins to use gates, which is a secret teleportation magic, to summon some creepy monsters. This leaves everyone in shock, because a creature worth 270 credits appears, a Grand Duke. Then they explain that the rule of the 1,000 part is how the tower calculates credits. In other words, a monster worth 1 credit is equal to a person with 1,000 credits. But that Duke there is worth 270, which is like a person with 270,000 credits. Right away, the demon attacks, but the group decides to get out of there. Windle tries to buy some time with his abilities, but the monster destroys the barrier he had created. He attacks Windle, but the protagonist manages to save him in time. After escaping the place, Will mentions that he had already read about the Grand Duke. The protagonist says that he's almost at the top of the demonic monsters, not to mention that they usually stay on the 25th floor of the dungeon. The group gets super nervous and comments that maybe it was because of the gate that Headless used. After a long time, the group can barely manage to hide, and we see that the monsters are still looking for him. They find themselves in a tight spot, trying to figure out how to get out of there, since it looks like the Duke sent a bunch of sentinels to search for them in the area. Julius even seems kinda desperate, but the main character says there's a way out. Take down the Grand Duke, because demons follow a power hierarchy, and without defeating the leaders, the chain of command should fall apart. That makes Julius think the main character is completely nuts, but Will says he has a plan to beat the monster. This annoys Julius, who says that nobody would trust him, but Ginal stands up for the main character, saying he trusts him because he's already saved him several times. Colhayton also thinks they should support the main character, which really surprises him. To top it off, Gina tells Liana that she let the main character touch her, so she expects her to trust him too. Then Liana says that she was always mistaken, because more than just the group shield, the main character is the true leader. Even so, Julius doesn't really trust the main character's plan, and Will says they need his power. On top of that, he says that if he helps, he'll teach him a secret about Alvis's power. And then we see the main character running and luring the monster. At that moment, he comes across several clones of Julius, and the monster starts attacking them. Right then, we find out what the main character had told his friend. If Julius used his clone ability, he could keep casting spells from where he left off. Even if the clone bit the dust, it's super handy for long spells, because if one clone goes down, the next one just picks up where he left off. And wouldn't you know it, the real Julius shows up right as the clones are finishing their spellcasting. But even with their combined attack, it didn't even scratch the monster. To make things worse, the main character tried to attack the creature from above, but saw that its wings were completely indestructible. Remember, he had studied about the monster in the library? So they tried to distract the monster to buy Julius more time. But Julius went in for a direct attack and still did no damage. Everyone got tense because that was the strongest attack he had. The main character realizes this monster is a real boss, 270 credits. But he remembers that the ice attack managed to slow the monster down a bit. With that, he sees an opening to use his speed and try to land a hit on the guy. But the plan went out the window because the girl did hit, but the demon had a magic shield. She went flying, but the main character managed to catch her in midair. And just as they were about to get hit, Kiki put up a protective barrier. The barrier broke and the damage hit the protagonist's glasses. Meanwhile, the teachers show up flying at the speed of light, watching everything through the Grand Duke's orb. They're super worried, like, what is a demon of this level doing here? Back to Will, they hit the ground, but Gina helped cushion the fall, and the main character is on the ground devastated, looking at the glasses Alves had given him, now destroyed. Then Eliana says she's going to stay behind to distract the demons so they can escape. Gina says she'll go too, and the two of them charge into the attack. Scion is super nervous watching the fight get harder and harder, and he thinks the two of them are going to die. He figures that if they die, it's better to run away than to die for nothing. At that moment, the main character asks Scion to punch him because he's shaking with fear after losing his glasses. Scion takes the opportunity and lands a few punches, which helps the main character regain his courage to fight. Dude, he was about to crap his pants for real. So he asks Colette to take care of Kiki because he's going to fight. He doesn't get how he suddenly stopped being scared, but Colette says he's always afraid. He just doesn't even know what that is because he uses a wand. She says that unlike him, who uses a sword and has to fight up close, he faces monsters way bigger than he is. Even though she calls him useless and all that, he's really brave. After hearing those words, the girl goes to help in the fight, and Sion keeps thinking that she's absolutely right. Meanwhile, the main character thinks he needs to rip off the creature's wings to break through its defenses. And that's when Colette shows up to lend a hand. The main character thinks that even without his glasses and scared to death, he has to win because he's way more afraid of losing and seeing his friends die. At that moment, the demon charges up some lightning and throws it at the protagonist, but he's super fast and jumps into the air. Colette casts a spell to power up his attack, and the protagonist lands a direct hit, slicing off one of the demon's wings. Then, Scion manages to summon his guardian to get close and unleash a powerful fire attack. But it doesn't do any good, and he still gets hit. Everyone is shocked, realizing there's nothing else they can do to defeat the guy. But then the protagonist spots a crystal nearby, and looking up, he sees Rusty. The protagonist has a flashback that shows he's had a special ability since he was a kid. Will realizes that his sword also works like a magic wand. So Justasa asks Theon to cast a fire spell on him, and when he grabs the sword, it starts absorbing his friend's attack. Now he has a flaming sword. He charges at the monster, dodging everything, understands what he's capable of, and unleashes the final blow. He drives the sword into the beast, slicing the demon in two. Everyone is left speechless, shocked by what they just saw. The protagonist's sword returns to normal and he wonders what the hell just happened. But there's no time to celebrate because a horde of sentinel monsters and orcs comes running toward them. Lyanna thinks she doesn't have the strength left to fight these creatures. One of the demons was about to attack Julius, but suddenly several lights start shining in the area. A divine summoning appears and destroys all the demons there. At that moment, some hooded guys show up too. The teachers arrive right after and are stunned when one of the hooded figures takes off his hood. It's Aaron, leader of the Light faction and known as the King of the Vendors because he's the oldest of them all. The protagonist is amazed to have the King of the Matty Benders and the most powerful wand of all right in front of him. Everyone starts idolizing the guy because he's like a god to everyone in the kingdom. Then the protagonist sees that someone arrives with him and introduces himself as Finn. Meanwhile, Marcy and Headless are celebrating that they managed to escape in time. They mention that they managed to get a sword they were looking for. The next day, they explain that 11 people died, all teachers who saved the students. And to be honest, there were only a few injuries. The protagonist's group is in the infirmary, wondering who Marcy and Headless were, since those guys had enough power to take out the Academy's teachers if they wanted to. Julius thinks that if Aaron hadn't shown up, everyone there would have been toast. Lyanna says a few encouraging words and admits that this wasn't their mission, that she only brought everyone together to get some recognition from the tower and ended up putting everyone in danger. But even so, she helped the protagonist discover his power, and in the end, they made a really good team. She says that her family's lineage of knights is grateful to him and respects him. Out of nowhere, the girl gets hungry, and Cole gives her some apples. But she's pretty greedy and eats all the apples, saying that hand-to-hand combat makes her need a lot of food to get her energy back. Everyone ends up a little disappointed with her answer because the girl wasn't as perfect as they thought she was. Gennaro says he was also surprised when he saw her eating for the first time because she eats like a pig. The girl changes the subject and says they won thanks to the protagonist's courage and effort. But Julius, as always, says the protagonist was shaking with fear. And he won't stop talking until Cole throws an apple in his mouth to shut him up. Meanwhile, Sion asks what kind of power that was that absorbed his magic. Lyanna thinks it wasn't a power or a spell. Julius gets mad and says she could have said that earlier to avoid all this drama, but Kiki jumps on him for being so annoying. Will says he doesn't even know what happened, that he just blanked out at the time. The girls think he should ask a teacher. Then the protagonist asks about Finn because they find it strange for a boy to hang out with the King of the Vendors. Lyanna says she read in some books about people like Finn who come from a village and can't use magic like the protagonist, but really know their way around dungeons. They've had a pact with the Magic Tower since the time of the Mage Queen and help the tower as guides inside the dungeon. There are even rumors that without their help, no one can reach the bottom of the dungeon. The protagonist thinks that he wants to learn more about the power he used and about the boy he talked to. Later that night, Finn arrives at the cauldron and says that their expedition made it to the 49th floor of the dungeon, and he thinks Aaron is a pretty demanding leader. He hands over a sword he found that's known as the Mage Slayer. Then the guy also says that on the 40th floor, they ran into some shady folks. There was a big fight, and apparently the sword didn't originate in the dungeon. The thing is, he thinks they're doing some experiments down there. After putting away the sword, the guy gets serious and asks why the cauldron hadn't said anything, since the deal was that the mages were theirs and Finn handled the swords, like obviously referring to us as the protagonists.
Cauldron says the mean guy is hyped to make a wand so he can catch up to Toos and become a magic bender. And Finn says it's the first time he's ever heard of a sword wanting to become a wand. Cauldron agrees that the whole situation's pretty weird, and the guy says he'll leave it in his hands, but warns that he'll be keeping an eye on things and might step in. The next day, even though he's all banged up, the main guy keeps training like crazy. Colette comes over to say something because the guy just won't sit still. His drive to reach the tower is insane. Meanwhile, the others are watching him from the window, wondering what kind of being he is, because he doesn't seem like a mage, but he's definitely not a normal person either. Suddenly, Scion yells at the main guy that he's gonna duel him and jumps out the window. But because of the pain from his injuries, he regrets it immediately, and Colette tells him not to even think about it since both of them are in pretty bad shape. But the guy, all proud, replies that if the main guy can fight and keep training, then he can too. Scion tells the main guy to keep his promise, since at the Magic Festival he had said they would fight another day. The main guy ends up agreeing and the two of them start trading blows. But the teacher saw the fight, so the two of them take off running because they know they're about to get hit with a major suspension. For several months, everyone just went about their normal routines at the academy. Until one day, Warner mentions that it's been a long time since the incident during training. The teacher gives them some encouraging words, saying that despite what happened, they can't let it get them down. And since the school year is ending, they're about to start the first day of the academy's graduation exams. The main guy gets super motivated, thinking he's gonna pass the exam and finally meet Alvis, the girl he loves. Sometime later, the group goes back to the dungeon. And this time, working as a team, they manage to defeat the boss Naveros. Time goes by, naturally, and Will is super focused on getting a perfect score so he can climb the tower and finally reach Elfie. Soon, exam season is coming to an end, and the teachers are shocked because Will Salford is the only student with a perfect score in absolutely everything. Warner is all excited, and Professor Elisa takes the opportunity to congratulate him because after so much effort, he's finally going to achieve his dream. Meanwhile, Julius and Scion are meeting with the principal, who praises them both because defeating the Floor Guardian with such a packed schedule is no small feat. But when he gets his wand, Julius blurts out that he only got involved because he already had a guaranteed spot in the tower. He didn't even need to face Navarros. Then Sion starts teasing him, saying that if Julius hadn't been there, nobody would have even noticed because his ice would have melted in the blink of an eye. In other words, it was totally useless. Julius doesn't let it slide and points out that Sion just hid behind everyone else to throw fireballs. As usual, the two start arguing, and the headmistress comments that you can really see how much they care about Will, which just makes them even angrier. Meanwhile, Will is studying like crazy. He hasn't slept in days, but he doesn't want to slow down because he knows that even a single point could change everything. Colette tries to convince him to take it easy, but Will explains that thanks to Liana and the others, he got a perfect score in the practicals, so now he has to work twice as hard so he doesn't waste their help. The host reminds him that he also earned points in sorcery after defeating Professor Edward, but Will insists that he's still missing 1 point and needs to make sure he gets it. At that, the host plucks a white hair from his head and warns him, if he doesn't get some rest, he'll go gray in no time. Colette gets furious, but the host just says he's doing what he always does and asks if she wanted to be the one to do it. She gets all embarrassed, and the host ends up winning that argument. Meanwhile, Liana tells Wiggum that after defeating Navarros, they can walk up to the tower with their heads held high. Wiggum replies that it wasn't even that big of a deal, since they've faced worse before. As they're walking, Wiggum notices that Liana has changed a lot and doesn't seem so tense anymore. She agrees and says that he has changed too, since before he was always hiding behind a smile, but never let his guard down for anyone. Wiggum admits that it's Will's fault because that day the boy showed that even he can mess up badly, and since then he's earned his respect. Liana adds that she also learned a lot from Will, and now understands that fear really can turn into courage. They wonder what Will must be doing, and Wiggum figures it out. Of course that bookworm is studying. At night, Colette goes to bring him something to eat in the library, all worried about him. When she gets there, she sees that Will is passed out from studying so much, and she takes the chance to cover him with a blanket. She checks to make sure he's really asleep, and seeing the coast is clear, decides it's a golden opportunity. When she tries to sneak a kiss, Host suddenly shows up out of nowhere to interrupt. She tries to make up an excuse, saying she was just fixing the blanket, but Host, who doesn't want anyone hitting on his friend, says he could have sworn he saw something else. Colette changes the subject and says she's just worried because Will pushes himself too hard and always ends up getting hurt. She admits she doesn't really like this whole magic thing because Will is always chasing after Elfaria like he's under a spell, while she's just stuck waiting in the tower. She feels sorry for Will, and Haas ends up agreeing with her. Meanwhile, up at the top of the tower, Elfaria runs into Eleanor, who immediately starts criticizing her and says it's rare to see her out of her room. Elfaria asks if she's still bitter about losing that duel, and Eleanor fires back saying she only lost because it was limited to ice magic. If it had been another element, she would have won. Suddenly, Zell shows up telling everyone to keep it down and get out of the way because he's coming through. Elfaria asks what they're doing there, and Zell says the reason is obvious and probably the same as hers. Terminalia's come in, and they need to get ready for the ritual because the barrier is about to disappear. To wrap things up, Professor Edward prepares the materials for the final exam, and the topic will be the origins of magic. The next day, he walks into the classroom and announces right away the exam has only one question, and whoever answers it correctly gets 6 credits. He makes it clear he doesn't want to hear any questions and that it's time for them to show what they've learned in 6 years at the academy. When they get the test, everyone is shocked by the question, what is magic? Even though it's a deep topic, everyone feels confident they can answer it. In the end, that's an answer any mage or elf would eventually figure out. The thing is, anyone who's not into magic wouldn't have the slightest idea how to answer. Will's friends are super worried, wondering what's going to happen to him, while the kid just sits there, mind blank. After all, that question isn't in the books. Will has no intention of giving up. He thinks about the elf, about the promise he made, and starts writing down what he feels. To him, magic is an unattainable miracle, something as beautiful as it is cruel. It's what lies beyond human effort, and he believes that if he doesn't give up, he'll deliver something equal to or even greater than hers. He finishes by writing that, to him, magic is, and then they leave us hanging in suspense. The scene changes, and Warner goes to confront Edward, asking what his deal is with this exam. Edward, all cynical, says he only asked the basics that any tower aspirant should know, and that he was disappointed because 4 out of 10 students failed. Warner is furious because he knows Edward did it just to screw over Will. He asks Edward if he has no shame, but Edward snaps back and says they're crazy for wanting to send someone who doesn't even use magic to the tower. According to him, sending Will there would be like sending him to a graveyard for wands just to be a guinea pig. In a world of magic, a sword will never be a wand, and he warns that both Warner and the principal are out of their minds. He simply ripped away a dream that was never going to come true. And then comes the bad news. On the list of those who failed, Will's name is right there. He ends up with 7,199 credits, and access to the tower is denied because he was short by just 1 point. The kid is devastated. Time goes by, and in the middle of the garden, the host comes to talk to him to let him know he fixed his glasses. Will opens up, asking if he saw how cruel Edward was. He's frustrated because he knows he never could have answered that question the way the teacher wanted, and now his promise is at risk. The host gives him a friendly hug and says that nothing will take away the pain right now, but he'll always be around. Meanwhile, Colette joins Higgin and Lyanna to try to find Will, but no one knows where he is. Julia shows up and tells it like it is. At this time, anyone who can't make it up to the tower usually disappears from the academy. He starts complaining, saying he's wasting his time looking for a useless guy and that Will ran away like a coward. Higgin can't take it and tells him to shut up, warning him not to insult an elf's friends. Julius asks if Higgin got bewitched by what Will did in the dungeon, reminding him that here, magic is everything and there's no place for a sword. Science stares seriously at Julius, and Julius says the two of them are the same, since neither of them can stand Will. Scion admits that Will gets on his nerves and that he wanted to make the kid eat dirt, but Edward took that chance away from him, and that's what makes him mad. Warner shows up and tells everyone to have fun since it's Terminalia, and says he'll go look for Will himself. The city starts celebrating the new year, and the event commentator, Claire, a high mage, 27 years old, who makes a point of saying she's single, starts complaining that her friends ditched her, using the students as an excuse. She's talking about Warner and Edward, remembering how they were inseparable as kids, but quickly pulls herself together so she doesn't embarrass herself any further. Claire tells the story of their ancestors who lived in peace until invaders from the sky arrived. When all seemed lost, the great Mercedes and 5 powerful mages appeared, sealing the sky and driving out the invaders. That was 500 years ago. The Fire Faction group makes sure everything goes perfectly. And up in the tower, Sovereign Carriot and the others are getting ready. Claire asks all the mages to raise their wands and join forces. Exactly at midnight, the magia vendor begin the supreme ritual of the Great Barrier. The protection is renewed and the new year kicks off with a celebration. But out of nowhere, the atmosphere changes. A strange message appears in the sky saying, "Happy New Year." Everything turns dark and portals start to open. Monsters and demons start popping up everywhere, spreading total chaos in Hardin. While chaos takes over, the ones responsible for this mess reveal their true intentions. This is the perfect moment for a hellish feast. Their plan was surgical, because now that the Magia vendor have just used up all their energy to create the barrier, they're completely drained. It's that old story, the heroes saved the world, but they were left without a drop of mana to defend themselves from what came next.
Meanwhile, Will is getting nervous watching those portals, and in the capital, the Boros are wrecking everything. The guards from the Fire faction have no idea what's going on, asking what these dungeon monsters are doing on the surface. Seeing that things are getting intense, Claire tells Rad that she'll cover them and that it's time for them to go on the attack now. With a blow on her wand, she summons an army of guardians that charges at the monsters, clearing the way for Rad's squad to fry everything with fire magic. Will's even startled, not understanding how Claire managed to call so many people at once, but soon everyone realizes that's the level of someone who runs the tower. Rad orders them to find the source of the magic circles and catch the culprit, but one of the monsters is still there, completely unharmed. Rad decides to go all out with his most powerful magic and starts celebrating too soon, thinking he's solved the problem. But that overconfidence came at a high price. Claire yells at him to get out of there, but there's no time. The monster lands a fatal blow, and that's the end for Rad. Claire is in shock when she sees that the creature ignores magic and that her guardians are being slaughtered. The monster turns on her, and she barely manages to dodge. Then she notices something. It's carrying a mage-slaying sword. From above, Headmistress Caldron watches the total chaos unfold. The other mages point out that the monsters are using the same weapons Finn had. Cauldron wonders if they managed to mass-produce those weapons, because their plan was really well put together. While she tries to figure out what they want, a professor suggests that the Academy should help in the fight, but she immediately refuses. She feels that this attack on the city is just a distraction, and orders everyone to defend the tower with their lives. The vendor mages know they're the target, especially since they're completely drained after raising the barrier. The assistant from the Flame faction tries to convince Aaron to let the vendor mages help, or else a lot of innocent people are gonna get hurt. But Aaron tells him to shut up, threatening to do to his throat what happened to his eyes. When asked if they're just gonna stand by and watch, Aaron confirms that's exactly what they're gonna do. No one leaves that room. If the barrier falls because one of them leaves their post, the Celestial invaders will destroy everything, and there won't be a stone left standing anywhere in the world. Meanwhile, the headless guy and his partner are a bit disappointed that the big fish didn't take the bait and didn't leave the tower. Even so, they have fun watching the misery happening down below. A little girl tries desperately to save her mother, but a giant monster shows up to ruin their day. Iris steps in to protect them both, but things go south because her magic doesn't even scratch the mage-killing sword. Just as the monster gets ready to deliver the final blow, Will enters the scene. That guy Marcy, the Headless One's partner, pays close attention when he sees they've managed to chop off the beast's arm. Will remembers how he used to hate being left out just because he didn't have magic, sometimes even resenting the mages. But he never wanted things to go this far. He plows through every monster in his way to protect everyone. The host tells him to focus only on the ones who are armed, because the mages can handle the rest who are unarmed. Without wasting a second, Will charges at a monster and slices it in half. Iris is impressed, knowing that Will is the only one who can face the mage-killing swords, but he won't be able to hold out on his own for long. That's when Aaron contacts her and gives her full authority. He orders the dwarves to be mobilized and to put an end to that mess. Iris doesn't waste any time and announces that, in the name of the king, the Goodwill Code is now in effect, lifting all restrictions on the dwarves. Now everyone is working together to drive out the threat. Warner runs and finds Donnan's group asking for help, but Donnan complains that it's no time to be working on New Year's. His wife scolds him, reminding him that Will needs them. On the other side, Edward tells the students that being a student doesn't matter right now. Everyone is a mage and needs to use their wand to defend the city. People feel a bit insecure, since the powerful folks from the tower couldn't handle it, but Liana steps up and proves that students have strength too. But even using all the power in her body, she still can't take down the monsters on the first try. Those swords are every mage's worst nightmare. Colette comes over to ask Liana not to do anything crazy, but Liana actually tells her to go crazy. Julius already wants to bail, thinking they won't hold out until the dwarves arrive, but Chongan points out that he noticed a weakness. When the monsters dispel the spell, they get kinda slow. That's the opening they needed to go all out with their attack.
the crew didn't waste any time and unleashed their magic at full power. Since the monsters were stuck trying to block the attack, the group gave the signal for Colette to step in. A bit nervous, she even apologized to the statue of Saint Viola, but there was no other way. She used her magic to lift that huge structure and crush the monsters all at once. It was a win for the group, but Julius was quick to point out the truth. Destroying the statue of an ancient vendor magic would bring a nasty curse down on them. But Leanna wasn't having any of that nonsense and ordered all the Earth Mages to start firing their projectiles, even if it was just plain rock, because it was time to turn their studies into real action. Claire just watched from a distance, thrilled to see that some heavy hitters would be joining the tower this year. She told the fire folks to line up with the Earth Mages until the dwarves arrived. And even though she hates to admit she needs their help, there was no other way out this time. Meanwhile, the headless guy commented that the city was holding up under the pressure. Marcy explained that it was a screw-up for the guys who made the swords to have crossed paths with this expedition, and they even lost a weapon to Aaron's group and the dwarf, Finn. If the Institute folks analyze that sword and figure out the mage killer's weak spot, their whole plan would go down the drain. But the headless guy wasn't even fazed, saying that, all things considered, everything was going just as expected. It was time to call in the heavy reinforcements. Out of nowhere, right in front of Will, a bizarre portal started to form, and from it came a terrifying monster that, with a single blow, sent Will flying, crashing through several buildings. Somewhere else, Finn was taking out the terrorists left and right. Suspicious that they were the masterminds behind the swords, he cornered one of them to make him talk. The guy just laughed, saying the whole plan was to lure Finn deep into the dungeon while chaos broke out upstairs. Finn wasn't in the mood for talking and sent the guy to the afterlife with a kick, already starting to worry about what was happening on the surface. Back to Will, the new monster was out for blood and sliced an entire building in half. Will barely managed to escape and realized that this creature was way more overpowered than the Grand Duke. Claire recognized the beast right away, a Devender, an elite monster from the 40th floor, famous for being a magic killer. Marcy revealed that capturing that thing alive had cost the lives of 50 soldiers, but now things were really about to get wild. Will saw how bad things were getting and thought about retreating, but when he noticed the monster was about to attack other students, he threw himself in front to stop the worst from happening. Even though the other mages called him useless, he just shouted for everyone to run away. The vendor landed a kick that sent Will flying and, moving at an insane speed, slammed him into the ground to finish the job. Luckily, Donan showed up to save him and told Will to take a break because now the dwarves were going to handle the mess. Iris ordered everyone who could still fight to cover Will because Devender had just become priority number 1. But then something bizarre happened. The bodies of the defeated monsters started to emit a strange smoke, which was all absorbed by Devender. Edward caught on to what was happening and ordered them to collect the magical remains, but the five-headed one warned that it was already too late. Devender absorbed everything, getting bigger and stronger by the second. Donan tried to stop the evolution, but Marcy blocked him, wanting everyone to witness the birth of a real monster. After absorbing everything, Devender evolved and in the blink of an eye wiped several dwarves off the map. Marcy burst out laughing, saying that against that thing, neither magic nor brute force would do any good. Will finally understood the dirty trick. The attack on the city and the ceremony was just an excuse to create the perfect weapon against the Magia Vendor. Desperate, Will realized he needed to use that power again. Without thinking twice, Rost ran to activate the magic on Will's sword, but the monster was faster and cut Rost's arm off. Blinded by rage, Will charged at the creature, taking the fight somewhere else. Rost asked Kiki to go help Colette, while he stayed behind to protect his master, feeling like his fate was already sealed. Will felt powerless. Even with all his anger, he couldn't win. In the middle of a smoke from the fight, he was shocked to see that Rost had sacrificed himself for him. Before disappearing, Rost said he would always be by his side and then disintegrated. Will remembered everything they'd been through together and, consumed by hatred and pain, completely gave himself over to the darkness. Luckily, Warner saves him at the last second, and the two of them take off from there, along with Will, who's completely in shock after seeing Rost exit the scene. Meanwhile, back at the tower, Saiyan is fuming. He decides to come down because he can't stand seeing so many people losing their lives anymore. Even though he thinks the low-level mages are just a bunch of flies, he can't just sit there watching the massacre. But Kario stops in. He reminds Sane that he can't leave, because if a Magia vendor is defeated, the Great Barrier's done for. And if that happens, the invaders from the sky will turn the whole world to ashes. To make things worse, they're not in the best shape and need to recover their magical power. Kario gives him a lecture about what it means to carry that title and tells him to sit back down. But Sane doesn't care and says it seems like they only give that title to cowards. When he tries to leave, Kario shoots a fire arrow and warns him, "Either you sit down willingly or I'll make you." Things get heated between the two, and Eleanor's assistant rushes to cover her boss with a cloak, asking them not to get any dirt on the lady. Eleanor decides the best move is just to wait, since that city doesn't belong to the elves. But then Philvis reminds her there's an elf caught up in the mess, and Eleanor, already annoyed, tells her to go fetch the guy right now. On the other side, you can feel the tension. Afaria stands up, goes over to Aaron, and tells him to cancel the orders because they're just wasting time. When Aaron stands his ground and says he won't change his mind, Faria loses it. She freezes the whole place and makes it clear she's not going to abandon the one she loves. She warns that she's going to save Will, and if Aaron gets in her way, she'll freeze his insides too. Meanwhile, Warner is over there thinking that Will is their only hope now, but the kid is completely wrecked. Will keeps blaming himself, saying that because he doesn't have magic, he couldn't protect Rost or anyone else. He feels useless, just like everyone always said, and he cries, not understanding why he's the only one who can't cast a spell. Warner tries to calm the guy down, but the peace doesn't last long, because Marcy shows up out of nowhere, determined to take Will out, since he thinks Will is way more dangerous than the dwarves. And in the middle of the chaos, the rest of the group keeps fighting hard. Colette, right after protecting Whitney, hears a massive explosion. Kiki shows up right after, looking totally devastated, and Colette immediately realizes that Will was caught up in the blast. Without thinking twice, she grabs Kiki and runs, asking her to show the way. Sen overhears the conversation and goes along, telling Julius to hold down the fort there. To make things worse for him, Inal and Liana also start pressuring Julius to create the clones, and he gets furious about being treated like the group's errand boy. Meanwhile, the headless guy is orchestrating the destruction and orders Olvander to head straight to the academy. Sarah even tries to stop him, but it doesn't even faze the guy. Seeing chaos take over, Edward makes an extreme decision. He orders the dwarves to get ready for a suicide attack in the central square to destroy Olvander's mage killer no matter what. Gina gets furious and asks who he thinks he is to send the group to their doom, reminding him that Donan and the others have already fallen, acting as shields. Edward confirms everything, saying they need to protect the capital and the children no matter what it takes. Suddenly, a Dynaborist charges straight at Gina, but Edward jumps in front and takes the hit for her. After taking down the monster, Gina, totally confused, asks why he did that. Edward explains that the enemy is now immune to magic, which means his life is worth less than hers, and he's willing to pay the same price so they can fight for their own. Shaken and annoyed, Gina gets up and calls the dwarfs to head to the central square. Colette keeps desperately searching for Will, but runs right into a Dynaborus armed with a Mage Slayer, which makes her magic completely useless. She even tries to go for something stronger, but her bracelet starts reacting at the worst possible moment, distracting her. Sheila, panicking at the danger, attacks with everything she's got. The overall situation's bleak. The mages are falling one by one, and Mike tells the civilians to all run south together. Those mages Will saved earlier are there, facing danger head on. One of them wants to get out of there, but his partner says there's no way to escape. Jula tells them to stop trying to be heroes, because they almost got sent to the afterlife. Luckily, Elisa shows up, tells them that evacuating the wounded isn't the same as running away, and orders them to leave while she holds off the monsters by herself. The city is in ruins, and with the end near, people can only cry for their loved ones. Iris even thinks the dwarves helped lessen the danger, but no one has been able to stop Olvander. All the defensive lines are fallen, everyone's strength is gone, and the dwarves who are left can't handle this monster. She wonders what else they could do, when suddenly she starts hearing something on the magic radio and wants to know what's going on. That's when Finn shows up right in front of her and asks the million-dollar question, "Where's the sword?" Back in the action, Marcy admits that the opponent is tough as nails because even in that critical situation, he tried to land a killing blow. But he insists that he hit him dead on. Will wakes up a bit confused, asking where they are. And Warner, in the middle of the smoke, says they've reached the west outskirts of the city. The problem is, when the dust settles, Will sees that Warner has a huge hole in his chest. Even gravely wounded, Warner smiles, happy that he managed to protect the boy. He apologizes to Will and says that now the city can only depend on him, believing that the boy will save Rue Garden. Will goes into denial. He feels frustrated because he couldn't protect Rost or Warner or anyone who matters to him. He cries, saying that a sword will never change the world and that a guy without magic can't do anything. Then Warner musters his last bit of strength, hugs Will, and tells him the truth. He had been lying this whole time. Will actually can use magic. He has a single spell capable of lighting the flame of hope in everyone around him. But before he can finish explaining, Warner loses consciousness and collapses. Will gets desperate, begging his friend not to leave him alone and asking how to use that spell. At that exact moment, Finn shows up and gives him a reality check to calm the boy down. Warner will survive and start breathing again as soon as his pulse comes back. Will is surprised, but Finn tells him the focus now is on Will, telling him to get up because everything's already set up. Will asks how the hell he's supposed to do magic, thinking he was about to start shooting fire from his hands. Finn tells him to stop being naive, explaining that Warner was talking about willpower, a kind of self-confidence to hold your head up and take action. Will complains that this childish trick isn't going to help at all, but Finn gets serious and tells him to stop talking nonsense. Real change in the world starts when we change ourselves. He reminds Will of his roots, hands the sword back to him, and says the lock is open. Just a drop of blood is enough for the sword to gain incredible power. He tells Will that he already knows the answer and that it's time to shout out the spell that's inside him. Will recalls everything he experienced at the academy, grips the sword tightly, and shouts, "Limitless Valor!" His hair changes color instantly. And you already know, right? In every anime where the main character's hair turns white, it means some massive power is about to show up. In a matter of seconds, Will starts clearing out the city, taking down all the monsters and leaving a white trail wherever he goes. He wipes out the threat with ridiculous ease, leaving everyone stunned, unable to believe that was really Will. Up ahead, Scion keeps protecting Colette. And even though she tells him to run away because it's too dangerous, he stands his ground. He says Will would never do that the coward has more courage than all of them put together, and that he's not going to be left behind. Will comes flying in at full speed and thinks Scion is mistaken. Actually, Will had always been jealous, but he also admired his friends. He spent his whole life chasing after the shadow of a magic wand. But now it's time to forge his own path and become a true arcane sword, destroying the monster's weapon and protecting Sion. On the other hand, Finn remembers the moment he met the great Mercedes. She was holding Will in her hands. She mentioned that they had bought some time, at least until the celestial invaders destroyed everything. It was enough time for her to create many wands and for him to forge a single sword. It was a contract that Finn proposed. He wanted to create someone capable of wielding the great fifth element. That's the key to tuning the world. The two of them understand something important. To save the world, the wand and the sword need to come together again in the present. As Finn looks at Will, he asks himself, is this the beginning of the opera he always wanted with Mercedes, or the start of a great tragedy? It's time to show the result of this contract with the Mage Queen. Wistoria, in turn, looks on in awe at Will's power. He pushes the monster back and leaves everyone stunned. Who wouldn't wonder what happened to him? Will goes after the enemy and takes care of business in a second. On the other hand, the principal tries to hold Deandra back with all her strength. The teacher next to her says it's time to get out of there, but she tells him to wait. At that moment, Will enters the academy. The principal's startled when she sees him. The boy moves forward with a ton of confidence. He goes all out against Deandra, and the two forces collide head-on. The whole city shakes from the impact's boom. Feel the tension in the air? Whitnell and Lyanna wonder if it's Will fighting. They don't waste any time and head straight there. Julius goes along too, because he doesn't want to be left alone. Edward can't even believe that's Will over there. Several students start running toward him. Meanwhile, up in the tower, the Maja vendor can't believe what they're seeing in the crystal ball. Wistoria blushes when she sees how strong her boy is. Colette stands up. Watching Will's fight, she can't understand how he's able to go toe-to-toe with Deander now. Before, he didn't stand a chance against the monster. She notices Edward and asks what's going on. She wants to know who that boy is. Edward breathes a sigh of relief, seeing his friend is okay. But he can't answer who the boy is. He's really frustrated. After all, he failed the boy. And now it's Will who's saving everyone's skin. A group of students approaches the academy. When Emma sees Will fighting, she thinks she needs to help, but a friend Paul holds her back. He reminds her that Thing is immune to magic. If they accidentally hit Will, things will get a lot worse. Everyone agrees with Paul. Besides that, they remember all the times they called Will useless. For years, they laughed right in his face. How could they possibly have the nerve to step in and help now? But one of them speaks up. Despite everything, Will saved everyone before, and now he's fighting for everyone again. They know it'd be super hypocritical, but even so, they still wish they could do something. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Sean shows up. He shouts to Will that he can do it. He yells with all his might. He's sure that Will is gonna end this. Man, even I got emotional here. When Colette, Liana, Whitnell, and the rest see him cheering, everyone joins in. They start rooting for Will. Even Sean and Julius's assistants join in the cheering. All the students are wholeheartedly supporting Will. Edward comments that he can't leave this in the hands of someone who doesn't use magic, but he doesn't have any strength left. Then Colette says he's being overprotective. It's time to trust the students and not just protect them. All of Regarden comes together to cheer for Will. Iris watches the scene and realizes something incredible. In a world focused on magic, everyone is cheering for a boy with no powers. And while Will faces Deander, he's deep in thought. He always felt bad, always got left out. All the people laughed at him. He even came to hate the world because of it, but deep down he just wanted to be accepted for who he was. And even if this is the only time people are cheering for him, those voices give him the strength he needs. He needs to protect the world and everyone in it. He goes all out against Deander, but unfortunately, his sword breaks in the middle of the action. Opharia senses something and looks down. Iris gets really worried. The steel of a sword couldn't withstand Will's incredible strength. Everyone gets tense. Will is unarmed and at a total disadvantage, but that's when Elfaria starts to act. Everyone remembers she's forbidden from leaving the tower. She makes up an excuse, saying she's just gonna take a look from the balcony. Outside, she creates a sword and lets it drop. She apologizes to the other Magivanders, saying it slipped out of her hand. The sword falls straight down to Will. He immediately feels Elfaria's power. He raises the hilt of his broken sword and absorbs his friend's magic. He forges a new sword, the Alvis Vina. Seeing that, Shun remembers the fight against the Grand Duke. It was exactly the same thing. But Julius doesn't get it. Why would he do that if the monster is immune to magic? The Dinder charges it well. The boy realizes the monster won't be able to withstand the attack. He hits the Dinder head on, dealing massive damage. Everyone is shocked. Edward immediately realizes that he used Vina. On the other side, Marcy is furious. He wonders what's going on. Why are they ruining his plans? Where did that kid come from? Zell just laughs, saying the boy is totally crazy. The other Magivanders get it right away. Will didn't use regular magic. He used the great fifth element, the Key of Origins. Aaron realizes that Finn got what he wanted, the perfect union between the wand and the sword, the promise of the Mage Queen. Will keeps going after Deander. He dodges and freezes all the attacks. Colette is surprised to see Will using the power of Alvis Vina. Everyone is shocked. It's like Will is fighting back-to-back with Elfaria. Deander's reaching with Lynette. Marcy panics and orders an all-out attack. The headless monster opens several portals at once. Will's completely surrounded, but look at Elfaria. She's brimming with confidence. She says they can come at him with as many as they want, because now, together with Will, they're unbeatable. Will drives his sword into the ground and charges up his power to the max. He activates Glass Frost, Elfaria's 7th spell. The attack creates a massive temple. It sweeps through all the monsters and instantly reduces everything to dust. Everyone there is in disbelief. Even Edward himself can't believe what he's seeing. The headless guy even drops his wand. Knowing no one can stop him, he decides to finish things off. He charges at Deander and slices the creature in half. Thanks to Elfaria's magic, he completely destroys the monster. The fight ends in a perfect visual spectacle. Paula Rigarden is amazed by the victory. The boy with no magic performed real miracles. Donovan and Gina are bursting with pride. Just like Workner, though, I have no idea how he survived all of this. Finn celebrates super excited. Will has exceeded all expectations. At last, they found the world's last hope. He apologizes to the great Mercedes for the delay, but says he kept his end of the deal and hopes she won't complain. After all, it was only 500 years of waiting. Now they can close the prologue and raise the curtains. It's the beginning of a story about a wand and a sword that are connected.
So we take a trip back in time, about 3 years ago. There was this incredible artificial rain falling, created by the mages, and everyone was amazed. Will was there, watching from a distance, and it hit him just how far away the tower was for him. It seemed like an impossible dream to get there, especially since he couldn't even control a single drop of water. He just wanted to be close to Elfie again and wondered if that would ever happen. That's when Ross shows up next to him, tells him to get out of the rain so he doesn't catch a cold, introduces himself, and says they're gonna be roommates and maybe even great friends. Back in the present, Headmistress Cauldron manages to heal Will and brings him back to normal. Finn quickly realizes that she mastered a really complex spell from Queen Mercedes, and that's why Will can still stay at the academy. He realizes that she needs to keep guiding and supporting the boy from now on. Will's memories fall perfectly into place, but Finn pays close attention and sees Will crying in his sleep, left wondering what's going through his mind in that moment of peace. The scene shifts to the Academy's infirmary. Professor Werkner opens his eyes and comes face to face with Colette and Edward, calling him stubborn. Edward gives him a serious scolding because he never takes care of his own injuries and hasn't changed at all since their school days. Liana explains that he passed out on the rooftop the night before and was brought there. She's all happy and tries to joke around, but Colette immediately shuts her down and tells her to behave. In the middle of all this commotion, Werkner remembers Will. Edward calms him down, telling him not to worry because the boy's being very well taken care of by Director Cauldron herself. Outside, the students are having a huge celebration because Professor Werkner got better and because they found out Will will be able to come back since he was the big hero of the battle. But Julius throws cold water on everyone's excitement. He calls everyone hypocrites and fakes, reminding them that just yesterday they were making fun of and humiliating Will for being weak, and now they're all sucking up to him just because they're interested in his strength. Elf and Ignal show up, tell Julius to stop being so stubborn, but agree that you can't deny the huge effort Will made to save everyone. Meanwhile, Sion just watches everything from the balcony, quiet and deep in thought. Over at the Vander Magic Tower, the atmosphere is heavy. The battle in Terminalia left 3,000 victims, and the leaders of the attack have simply vanished without a trace. Aaron orders everyone to investigate every corner, splitting the search among the factions, and immediately commands that the city's reconstruction begin at once. He questions why Will's officially out of the academy. Iris puts all the blame on Principal Cauldron, saying she hides things. Aaron realizes that the principal has been making too many decisions on her own, so he decides that from now on, Finn will be directly responsible for Will. The meeting of the mages remains tense. Aaron suspects that this attack is connected to that great war against the Destroyers, who almost wiped out the world of magic 10 years ago. The Fire Mage asks if any of those monsters could have survived. The Elf Mage, Eleanor, says that's impossible because her people fought to imprison all of them. But Zeus taunts her, reminding everyone that she ran away and hid in the forest back then. She completely loses it, attacks Zeus, and destroys a good part of the room. Iris rolls her eyes and mutters that this is why she hates going to these meetings. Aaron shouts, stops the fight, and tells everyone to focus on their work because tough times are coming. They notice Elfie is missing, but her assistant makes up a story that she has a stomachache, when in reality, she just wants to stay by the window watching Will. In a quieter corner, Colette and Liana are talking. Colette brings flowers for Rost, saying it's the least she can do, even though he doesn't have an official grave. They talk about who Rost really was. He was a transfer student from the Western capital, super focused on becoming a good craftsman, and out of nowhere became Will's best friend. Colette admits that she felt a little jealous of that friendship, but that Will always considered Rost a very precious friend. The city starts being rebuilt at an impressive speed, thanks to the hard work of the dwarves. Iris runs into Finn and calls him by a nickname that really annoys him. She tells him to his face that she hates him and warns him to stay far away from Will. If Finn gets too involved, things are going to get out of control and no one will be able to stop the disaster. Finn understands that Iris just wants to protect Will because she likes him, but he's already made up his mind. He wants to keep the boy as his ally, no matter what it takes. We get another quick flashback. Rost asks Will if he would feel bad if he suddenly disappeared, saying that goodbyes are hard. Will asks him to stop with that and says that he cares a lot about him.
Ross thinks Will's gonna forget about him when he goes up the tower since the distance will be great, but the boy promises he'll take care of him and that distance doesn't matter. Will then wakes up with a start. He looks to the side and sees Ross' face, but the sadness quickly hits when he realizes it was just an illusion and the only one there was his pet cat. The big day graduation at the academy arrives. Even though it's a day of victory, the mood is still one of mourning because of the tragedy and the lives lost, including students and teachers. Director Cauldron gives an emotional speech in honor of those who fell, but she warns that they can't stay stuck in the past. The attack was just the beginning, and the new generation needs to move forward without losing hope. 250 students graduate, but the big question was who would get to climb the tower? To do that, they needed a lot of points and to create a brand new spell. 49 names are called and they receive the official hat. Will keeps his head down, really sad, realizing he didn't make it in. But then the table's turn. Director Cauldron takes the floor again and says that one student didn't meet the traditional requirements, but did something impossible to ignore. The magic he used saved lives, drove away fear, and protected the city. The magic of courage. And she calls Will up to the stage. The crowd's divided, but the principal demands respect. Cian is the first to start clapping, and soon everyone joins in, giving the boy a standing ovation. Edward is about to explode with anger, thinking it's absurd for them to have hope after everything that's happened. But Finn smiles, confident that they'll overcome anything with a strength like that leading the way. The ceremony comes to an end. The 50 chosen ones are ready to head to the tower. The principal gives one last warning that the journey will be full of tough obstacles. While the students celebrate, Elfie watches everything from above, her heart racing. Will, now wearing the official wizard's hat, breaks into a huge smile and says his dream has finally come true. He's gonna see Elfie again. Feel the drama. Will remembers that moment when he was with Elfaria and she was telling him about her dreams. Every time she talked about it, her eyes sparkled like jewels. She was such a dazzling girl that next to her, he felt like a complete nobody. He was absolutely sure his friend would achieve all her goals. As for him, not so much. Even so, Elf would jump up to hug the guy, making it clear she wanted to make those dreams come true with him by her side, because without him, the story wouldn't make any sense at all. It's been 5 years since that day, and now they're finally gonna be able to meet again. Sometime later, at a city boutique, everyone is getting ready for the big sale. The owner, Brentold, says the outfits look amazing on them. Leanna comments that the academy uniforms were already high quality, but these clothes are on a whole other level. Brentold apologizes for leaving everything to the last minute, but Leanna says it's totally understandable after everything that happened. Julius looks at himself in the mirror and says, that's the look they'll be rocking when they enter the tower. Colette notices that he's acting a little different and asks what's up, but he tells her to shut up. The shock makes Colette stumble and knock a bunch of mannequins over onto Julius. She runs out and apologizes to the store owner and goes to Lyanna to say that Julius is acting really weird. Lyanna asks if any faction tried to recruit Colette, and she confirms that the Earth faction sent her a letter a while ago. Then, Lyanna sums up how the invitations are going. Cyan was recruited by the Fire faction, Ignal by the Elf faction, and she herself by the Lightning faction. But you know what's curious? No one has contacted Julius. That's why he's acted like that. With all the outfits ready, Brentold wishes everyone good luck. Before leaving, Ignul asks where Will went. Brentold reveals that young Surfod already stopped by, but he was in a hurry and didn't stay long. Colette immediately realizes he must have gone to meet up with Dognan. Will's getting a brand new sword. He put a special gem in it so it can store magical power. Dognan pats him on the back, saying he used to think the previous sword was his masterpiece until Will broke it in half. Will apologizes and asks how much he owes, but Dognan gives him the weapon as a gift for saving his life and wishes him the best of luck in the tower. Will is super excited and runs off to meet his friends. At the entrance, Claire greets the group with a quick speech, opens the giant door, and welcomes them to the paradise of research and the hell of studying. When they step onto the platform, everyone gets a little nervous because they can't see anything until Claire casts a spell that opens the ceiling and lifts the group up. They arrive right at the first stratum of the tower, the colorless garden. Everyone is totally amazed because the place even has a floating castle. They wonder if they're really inside the tower. Claire explains that this is where all the production that keeps the tower running comes from, and it's the birthplace of many new spells. Just setting foot here is already a huge achievement for any mage, but from now on, it's up to them not to get stuck there forever. Claire, all excited, tells them to hurry up because people are waiting in the ceremonial hall. On the way, Liana asks Ignal if that whole space was created with illusion magic. He confirms, but warns that the elves' illusion magic is on a whole different level. Colette is beaming, still processing the fact that she's now a high mage in a place that's the pinnacle of magic. She spots a crepe shop and, without thinking twice, uses lightning speed to buy a ton of food. Liana has to chase after her to remind her that it's not snack time. Sion warns Will not to let his guard down, because the tower isn't all paradise. Will doesn't really get it, but Sion just walks off. That's when Will notices some really weird looks coming from the other mages. And Julius confirms that the rumors were true. They arrive at the ceremonial hall and meet the mages of darkness, earth, and wind. Colette notices that there's a guy glaring at them, looking pretty unfriendly. He's the director of the Higher Institute and leader of the colorless faction, Cut Harlan. At that moment, several other platforms start to descend, and they're surprised to see that it's the Magia vendors. Will gets really excited to see Elfaria, and Ignal feels the same about seeing Eleanor, even though she looks at him with total disdain. For some reason, Elfaria looks away from Will with a bit of pity. Claire welcomes the Magia vendors. Carriote asks her to be a good master of ceremonies and not bore anyone. She gets annoyed and says the position has gone to his head. Carriote just laughs and says he learned from his superiors, but his assistant, Lotwell, only needs to mention the boss's name to get him to behave. Claire smiles and picks up the pace to start the blooming ceremony. Will wonders what that means. Claire explains that first, they'll see which newcomers were recruited for their great deeds at the Academy and the Magic Festival, and those lucky ones will receive the blessing of the colors. Quickly, the group's clothes start changing to the colors of their factions. Liana gets the color of lightning, Colette gets earth, and Ignal gets the elves' color. Unfortunately, Julius and Will don't get any color, and the rule there is clear. Whoever gets a color can keep moving up and dream of becoming a magia vendor. But whoever stays colorless is doomed to live in the Wand Cemetery. Going back a day, Elfaria was furious with Sarissa, calling the girl a liar. Sarissa had promised that she could recruit Will if he entered the tower. Elfaria did everything right, waited for the studies to finish, and they agreed that he would be accepted if he had the credits. She shows all the recruitment letters she sent to Will and questions whether Sarissa sabotaged everything. Sarissa defends herself, saying it was the Higher Institute that intercepted the letters. Elfaria asks if she's talking about Kroots, and Sarissa confirms. The guy refuses to put a swordsman in a faction and doesn't want to let anyone recruit him. Elfaria threatens to go down there and freeze everyone into a new ice age. Sarissa tells her to calm down and explains that if, during the blooming, Will proves he deserves to be there, not even Krutz will be able to do anything. The tower is based purely on merit, and showing favoritism toward Will right now wouldn't help. The tower needs to see his potential. Sarissa promises to talk to Claire and other factions and asks if Elfaria doubts that Will can handle it. Elfaria immediately cuts her off. She knows that Will can overcome any obstacle. Back in the present, Claire tells the blessed mages to go to their factions, and the ones left behind are out of luck. Claire's very straightforward. Only the colorless ones are left, the ones who have no value. Without a faction, no one moves up. A mage ends up stuck forever on the first stratum, working for the high-level mages. But since they made it this far, they'll get a chance to prove what they're made of. That's when things really start to get complicated. Monsters start emerging from the ground for the real first blooming. The group even tries to work as a team, but they can't even scratch the creatures. Kroots comments that those monsters are the Sochthonia, the guardians of the first stratum. Julius decides to put on a show and takes down 2 monsters at once. Sarissa is surprised to see how much better he controls the clones compared to the festival. The wind leader, Arvin, comments that Julius is way above average, and the darkness folks can't understand why he wasn't recruited. Julius starts feeling himself, hoping Elfaria will notice him, but she ignores him. He starts to panic, thinking she's mad about the way he treated Will. The Earth leader says he would recruit him if he didn't use ice? Arvin says there's no one else there worth recruiting, but Sarissa smiles and points out that someone else is drawing attention. Will is just dodging the attacks. And Julius taunts him, saying that running away won't get him anywhere. But Will's team knows the truth. He's not running away, he's analyzing. He says he doesn't need any help and finally understands why Elfaria looks so sad. They didn't let her recruit him. but everything's under control because he's gonna make his own way to her. He charges forward and slices the monster in half with a single blow. Everyone is really impressed by his strength and speed. The faction assistants can't believe what they're seeing. Will keeps putting on a show, but suddenly an army of monsters appears. Julius tries to attack with everything he's got, but one of his spells goes off course and heads straight toward Elfaria. But Will doesn't waste any time, and he's not going to let anyone lay a finger on her. He jumps in front of the attack, shields Elfaria, and absorbs Julius's magic into his sword. This charges up his weapon and lets him activate the strengthening spell. With his weapon fully charged, he charges forward, sweeping across the battlefield and wiping out all the monsters in his path in no time. Elfaria watches in awe, full of pride for her hero. Claire wonders what they should do with Will, since he didn't leave a single monster standing. In the end, Elfaria gives the boy her blessing, and she's not the only one. The Fire, Wind, Earth, and Darkness factions also want the boy at any cost. Will can hardly believe it, while the Institute's vice principal, Charles Lowers, left speechless. After all, not even the rarest mages, those capable of using multiple elements, have managed to receive blessings from 5 factions at once. Zio just watches Will in silence, while Julius comments that the boy really loves to be the center of attention. Claire tells Will that anyone who receives multiple blessings has the right to choose where they want to go, and obviously, Will's plan is to run off with Elfaria. But the joy doesn't last long. The headmaster of the Institute shows up to rain on everyone's parade, saying that what that boy just did can't really be called magic. He admits that considering everything Will did during the Terminalia Festival, he doesn't mind accepting him into the tower. So far, so good, but he has serious doubts about whether someone like Will really deserves to join one of the factions. Elfaria gets furious and asks if he didn't see what the boy was capable of doing. But Croaks replies that all he saw was a boy who didn't use his own magic, but someone else's power. To him, a trick like that doesn't make anyone a mage. Will would just be a brute warrior pushed to the extreme. Croaks asks what the rest of the tower would say if they found out about something like this. Eleanor asks him to cut the nonsense and get straight to the point. Without hesitation, Croaks surrounds Will with pillars of energy and summons 2 monsters created specifically to counter dwarves. Creatures called Wars, which are easily defeated with even the slightest touch of magical power. In other words, they were tailor-made to fight those who can't create magic from scratch. If they really want Will to climb the tower, he's gonna have to face these creatures and win. The monster charges straight at Will, who reacts quickly and slices the creature in half. But the effort is useless, because the monster's body regenerates instantly. Branham comments that Croaks has a point, and decides to just watch for now. As a magic vendor, he needs to protect the reputation of the place. Will starts to get frustrated, because no matter how much he disarms or slices that thing, he can't do any real damage. He figures that a monster at this level must have a weak spot, a core hidden somewhere. As soon as he finds the spot, Will attacks with force, but the blade has no effect. Croaks mocks the boy, saying he's way too naive, since the creature's body and core are completely liquid. The monster starts releasing powerful electric shocks. Claire comments to Croaks that his invention to neutralize warriors is really in bad taste. Seeing Will in trouble, his friends remember how he saved their lives and try to help by casting spells, but Croaks stops him right away. He orders that no one interfere, warning that their test is already over and that this has now become a tribunal to judge a dangerous individual. Meanwhile, you can see that Scion is furious about the situation because he knows perfectly well that Will has the right to climb the tower. Our protagonist, on the other hand, isn't thinking about giving up, but Croaks decides that enough is enough, since continuing with this is a waste of time and it's clear the boy doesn't have what it takes. He suggests leaving Will without a defined faction, registering the young man at the lowest possible rank in his division. He says that the potential of that power absorption technique is undeniable, capable of stopping even a war, so he himself will take responsibility for studying these secrets. The director asks the others for a vote of confidence, saying that the entire magical world will benefit from his research. Branham understands that he just wants to use Will as a guinea pig, but if that helps unravel the mystery of the Great Fifth Element, he doesn't see a problem with it. That comment really gets Elfaria heating. Branham asks her to calm down, saying that this isn't the time or place for tantrums. Annoyed, she reminds Croaks that this wasn't what they had agreed on, and is about to lose control. That's when Zio joins the conversation, already tired of all the arguing. He reminds everyone that there will soon be a new selection, and it's best to save their arguments for that moment. Will finally sees a glimmer of hope when Claire announces that, by the rules, the next selection would be in 6 months. But after the tragedy at the festival, the factions lost a lot of people and need replacements as soon as possible. So that year, there will be a second chance already the following week. Claire comments that all the survivors there have been through a tough time, but still have plenty of room to grow, and the world expects great things from them. So even those who didn't pass the test today should give it their all the following week, and that goes for Will too. She asks if the other leaders agree. After all, the tower operates under a single law, proving your own worth. Croaks doesn't like the idea at all, but Branham doesn't mind. In the end, they only made it to the top because they proved their worth time and time again. With that settled, the leaders leave. Liana and the others feel bad that Will wasn't able to level up this time. Cyan is still upset, and Elfaria hopes to meet up with her partner soon. When the hall empties out, Will collapses to the floor. Seeing this, Julius asks if he's crying. Will says he's not, but finds it strange how there's always some obstacle in his way. Even so, he promises he won't throw in the towel and will do whatever it takes to catch up to Alfaria. Later on, Zeal's assistant, named Gil, comments that he found it odd the boss didn't give Will his blessing, since the boy seemed to have all the qualities he was looking for. But Zeal says the assistant is too naive and didn't understand anything about the situation. He explains that what he really likes is seeing people who manage to turn things around and rise up from rock bottom, because it takes real strength to do that. Time goes by and we see Will completely focused on his studies. He knows that by setting aside elf magic, he needs to find a solution based on the 7 elements, since he was born without the gift of magic and doesn't have a natural affinity with any element. On the other hand, he can channel energy from outside. If he can figure out how this absorption mystery works, maybe he'll discover a way to use his own strength. Meanwhile, his classmates are a bit worried since Will hasn't left his book since the night the test ended. Emma comes over and asks if she can call him by his first name. Will remembers that she's the girl who talked to him after the festival. Emma properly introduces herself and says that the group was planning to go to the dungeon to train for the next selection and wanted to know if he'd like to join them. She makes it clear that even though things have changed now, it doesn't erase what they did to him in the past, but she hopes he'll give the group a chance. Will accepts the invitation, but their conversation's interrupted by Julius. He shows up saying that Will isn't going anywhere with him because he's going to train under his supervision. Julius tells Will that what he needs right now isn't new friends, but to master the power he already has, and that he's going to help him with that mission. Will thinks his attitude is strange and asks why. Julius replies that despite the disagreements they've had, he also considers Will a good teammate. But knowing Julius, all this kindness might have ulterior motives. Will falls for it, thinking he's earned his teammates' trust, but soon Julius's real plan becomes clear. He's doing all this for his own benefit. Since Will and Elfaria are childhood friends, if Julius helps the boy, he scores points with her and secures her blessing. His plan is to take advantage of Will to secure a spot in the Ice faction, and he quickly tells the guy to get moving. The rest of the students, however, know very well that Julius is up to something. A while later, at the training field, Will shows up with his sword already charged with energy. Julius orders him to keep the weapon just like that, with the energy at the lowest level. Next, he summons several small mechanical guardians that surround Will. The boy's test will be to face these creatures without destroying them, controlling the flow to keep his magic power as low as possible. Julius reminds Will that in the 6 years he's been at the academy, he hasn't managed to cast even the simplest spell of all. That's why, instead of wasting time trying to learn magic he can't master, it makes much more sense to focus on controlling the power he already has. Will understands the logic, but he doesn't know how to put it into practice. Since he doesn't have magic of his own, he has to charge the sword using other people's power. Relying on others to get energy goes completely against the idea of activating the power on his own. He feels like Julius is asking him to create something out of thin air, which would be like inventing a brand new kind of magic. Julius tells him to stop complaining, saying the process is simple. He just needs to hold the energy inside himself. Even if the power is borrowed, as soon as Will manages to hold it within his own body, it becomes his. Will gets pretty excited about Julius's theory. Meanwhile, his classmate comments that it's obvious that in the next round, they're gonna have Will face those liquid monsters again. And according to what director Cruz Soul said, those creatures fall apart at the slightest contact with real magical power. Will's only focus should be on holding the energy. The only problem is that they have just 1 week to make this work. So Julius tells Will that he'd better set aside his bookworm habits and give his all in physical training. Will is impressed when he realizes that Julius came up with an exercise that trains 2 things at once. He thanks Julius and says he's brilliant, even finding it strange that no faction has recruited him directly. That comment gets under Julius's skin and he snaps back, annoyed, saying it's all Will's fault. Meanwhile, on the other side, right on the first level of the tower, in the main garden, a mysterious mage watches the boys from afar. She remarks that youth really is an amazing time, and says she's curious to see how this training will end. She smiles, knowing that these young people's fate is about to change in the coming week. Now, in a quick flashback in the Rainbird's garden, we see a mysterious necklace full of secrets. But the scene flies by and we're soon back in the present, where Will is still pushing through his intense training. Julius is at the end of his rope and really lays into the boy, complaining that all he's good for is breaking the Guardians and that he's not making any progress in his development. Will apologizes, but thinks to himself that no matter how hard he tries, his body can only keep up the pace for at most 50 minutes. After that, his energy disperses, and to make things worse, as soon as the effect of the wisp wears off, all the accumulated fatigue hits him at once. The young man laments, thinking they're just wasting time. But Julius refuses to give up, even though he's visibly exhausted. Will suggests that they investigate the origin of the wisp more thoroughly before continuing, since even he doesn't know where this power comes from. He says he combed through the entire library and didn't find anything useful. Professor Warner seemed to know something, but it was pretty superficial, so it would be best for Julius to ask for permission to access the secret archives or look for someone who really understands the subject. That's when Julius surprises him and says he's been doing exactly that from the start. One of his clones is reading the archive texts right now, while another went to talk to Alyssa to try to get a lead on Finn's whereabouts, or anyone who might be able to help. Will is impressed and asks when his friend learned to control the clones like that. But Julius, annoyed, cuts him off and says what's important is gathering information while they train. The problem is that keeping his mind split in 3 places at once is wearing him out. Will asks why he's so worried about him, and Julius tells it like it is. He says he's just taking advantage of Will to get ahead and reach the top, using whatever he can, and that a noble never breaks a promise. When he hears that, Will smiles and remembers that right after the festival, Julius really did keep his word and went to apologize to the dwarves. The boy realizes that deep down, his companion is a good person. After all, kindness shows itself in different ways. Colette's kindness is helpful, Warner's comes in the form of scolding, and even Sean has his own twisted way of helping. Julius remembers that his own maid used to say the same thing, which makes him feel awkward, and he goes out for a walk. As he walks away, he tries to convince himself that he doesn't care about this whole being good thing. But then a new flashback shows that in the past, Julius took care of an injured kitten. His maid, Anna, saw what happened and praised the boy's good heart. At the time, Julius was really proud and replied that nobles had a duty to protect the weak. Anna smiled, patted his head, and gave him that necklace from the beginning, saying that everyone in the house admired him a lot. But over time, things changed, and Julius started to think she was lying because he felt like no one really valued him. That's why he buried his gentle side and decided to focus only on himself. Back in the present, he thinks that kind Julius is long gone. Meanwhile, without him knowing, a camera in the lab is monitoring his every move. Cross watches the monitor and comments that their efforts are useless, while working on creating a new kind of monster, and orders Charles to make contact with the colorless allies. Julius ends up getting lost along the way and is suddenly surrounded and attacked by this colorless faction. The attackers warn him that they're just following orders to interrupt his training. Julius fires back, saying they're a disgrace and that if they think they're gonna stop his evolution, they're dead wrong. This enrages the mages, who attack with everything they've got, frustrated from being stuck in the tower for so long without being able to move up the ranks. They reveal that Cross promised to recommend them to other factions if they manage to take out Julius. The young man realizes they've thrown their pride away for a shot at an opportunity, but he knows that even corrupted, they're still high-level mages. To make matters worse, Julius is exhausted from the clones and guardians he summoned earlier. Even so, he looks down on his rivals, calling them mediocre, saying they only moved up by pure luck and then got stuck. The mages completely lose control and go in for the final blow. In slow motion, Julius accepts that he's not a nice guy, and the hatred from those three is proof of that. But as expected, Will shows up at the last second to save his friend's skin. Julius complains about the interference, but Will explains that he came running as soon as he heard about the widespread attack. Julius tells the boy to leave, insisting that he just wants to use him and reminding him that he even made fun of him at the festival. Will, in his innocent way, says he's kinda naive and ends up getting attached to anyone who treats him well. That answer makes Julius think of Anna. He gets so shaken and embarrassed that he slaps Will, yelling that he hates him, even though deep down he loves feeling cared for. The three enemy mages aren't interested in any drama and attack again, but before they can reach the two, a wall of fire blocks their path. The mysterious woman who appeared earlier emerges in the middle of the flames and warns that magic shouldn't be used for cowardly acts. Will asks who she is, and the woman introduces herself as Sereth YWN. She says she found that youthful scene so beautiful that she decided to become their new teacher. A quick check of the records reveals that she belongs to the Zant race, claims to be eternally 20 years old, loves determined young people, masters all elements except light, and has already reached the 40th floor of the dungeon. In short, she's extremely powerful and impressive. End of explanation. Upon hearing her name, Julius remembers the Academy legends that describe her as the Hammer Witch, someone who kidnaps students to conduct experiments. Sereth YWN denies the rumors, saying she just wants to guide talented young people. She reveals that she's been watching them for a while and, using her water magic, traps the two of them and takes them away, warning that the Institute will soon send reinforcements to the site of the battle. Meanwhile, in Euphoria's quarters, Iris questions why she hasn't recruited Julius to her side, since a Watcher shouldn't ignore someone like him. Euphoria, annoyed, replies that the boy was arrogant with her and still treats Will badly. Iris realizes that the rejection was purely out of spite. Then Euphoria asks what Aaron thinks about Will. Iris says that he prefers to let things happen naturally, and unlike Director Cauldron, he won't make things easier for the boy. He'll only give in if Will wins on his own merit. Euphoria's assistant silently reflects that Will's wish power could turn the world upside down and cause divisions within the tower, regretting not knowing how to handle such a complicated situation. In the midst of these thoughts, Iris decides to stir things up and says that if everyone turns their back on Will, she'll use her own influence to adopt him. Euphoria gives a fake smile and tells her rival to save her fantasies for when she's asleep, calling her a thief. The assistant worries about the rift this could create in the tower. Back with the guys, Sereth YYN welcomes him to his mansion, which serves as a secluded secret base. She quickly serves a full banquet. Julius refuses to touch food from a suspicious witch, but before he can finish complaining, Will is already thanking her and cleaning his plate. Julius scolds his friend and asks where they are. The woman explains that this base was built by Claire in the first extract at her request, revealing that Claire is her disciple. The young men finally understand the laid-back behavior of their old acquaintance. Julius asks what she wants with Will, and the boy tells his friend to relax. Julius argues back, saying Will needs to be more suspicious since she could be a spy from the Superior Institute or a mad scientist looking for test subjects. Sereth YWN agrees that caution is important, but decides to prove her intentions. Without saying a single word or reciting any spells, she activates dozens of magic circles instantly. Julius is left speechless when he realizes just how insanely powerful she is. Sereth YUN jokes that if she wanted to experiment on them, it would only take her 2 seconds to finish them both off. Julius remains suspicious and demands to know her real interest, threatening not to let her teach Will anything. The boy gets embarrassed, and Julius insists that he's the only one there who can take advantage of Will, swearing that he's not doing it out of kindness.
Sereth smiles and explains her 2 reasons. First, she knows about Whis, and second, she doesn't agree with the direction the Higher Institute is taking, trying to control the boy. When he hears this, Will realizes that the director is behind everything. On the other side of the tower, Crows rages about having lost sight of the kids and orders a search in every corner. Charles asks why Crow is so obsessed with Will, and Crow replies that he won't let other factions get their hands on such a valuable specimen. Crow says they need to extract Wiz's potential, and to make his point, he shows Lender's remains, along with the Mage Slayer technology. He explains that this weapon can turn even the weakest mage into a major threat, and that it can be mass-produced. To him, real strength lies in numbers and organization, not in the individual glory of a few powerful mages. The director's ultimate goal is to decipher Wiz so that all his soldiers can use it.
and for that, he needs to capture and analyze Will. Charles is horrified when he realizes the director is a cruel and sadistic scientist, knowing that if Euphoria finds out, she'll destroy the Institute without a second thought. Even so, Crow orders that the factions be informed that they'll soon have a defense against the mage killers, since he has already figured out the basic mechanism of the artifact. Back at the mansion, Saratwin confesses to the boys that she would have preferred to just watch their development from afar, but decided to step in to keep Will from becoming a test subject for the Institute, and also because she received a request from Euphoria herself. But she makes it clear that the final decision is up to them. Will tells Julius that he feels like he can trust the woman and has the strange feeling that he already knows her from somewhere. Julius tells him to do whatever he wants, and Will asks his friend not to be upset, assuring him that he's not leaving him out. The two start to argue lightly, and Will quickly apologizes. Watching the scene, Saratwin realizes that they get along well and have everything it takes to become a great duo. Full of energy, she interrupts their conversation, announces that she's going to turn their potential into real power, and out of nowhere orders Will to take off his clothes to get things started. Cut to Will, half-dressed and totally lost, trying to figure out where this is going. Saradin smiles and assures him she's not going to do anything wrong, even though she can't hide her excitement. Julius immediately points his finger, accusing the teacher of having questionable intentions, but she defends herself, saying she was misunderstood and that this is 100% necessary. Will ends up accepting the situation, realizing he doesn't have much of a choice, but Julius keeps complaining and calling her a pervert. But he shuts up the moment he sees the huge scar on Will's back. Frozen, just imagining the kind of craziness the kid went through to climb the tower. Saradin inspects the mark and asks where he got it. A little embarrassed, Will answers that he thinks it happened while protecting Euphoria when they were kids. Right then, Saradin gives him a slap on the back and says, "It's exactly right here." She explains that she was just checking where the lock is to open the door. She says she's been watching their training and thought it was brilliant for them to focus on anchoring, because if Will can control the magical energy that anchors, it'll lead him straight to Wiss. She also sends a message to Julius, telling him to be more honest with himself because he's brilliant. Julius, proud as ever, says he doesn't need empty praise, since in the end he was wrong. But Saradin insists that's not true. Will is literally the embodiment of anchoring. He's already overcome the barrier of storing magical energy because running through his veins is the blood of mages, the blood of wands. Will's body is special. He can't expel magical energy. He absorbs it and stores it deep within himself. It doesn't matter how much his body protests. Saradin lays it out stipe. His mission now is to learn how to use that stored energy whenever he wants. In other words, he needs to recharge himself, and that's the next level. The problem is, Will has no idea how, since he always thought he needed other people's spells to recharge. The teacher agrees, but explains that the story goes even further. As proof, she reminds him that he's already activated powers different from the spells he usually uses, and now it's time to learn how to control that. She starts drawing a magic circle with her wand and explains that by tapping into the history of this magic connected to his blood and memories, he'll be able to recharge himself. A new kind of recharge, the power of emotions. Without wasting any time, she pushes Will into the circle and tells him she's going to channel her power into the lock to guide him to a specific place where he'll have to remember his roots and figure out how to awaken this power. She points her wand at the scar and recites an oath about hiding the true forbidden name of the sword and following the trail of the noble lineage. The circle reacts instantly and breaks the seal on his memories, activating a spell called Tarp History. Out of nowhere, Will sinks into the circle, falling into a bottomless pit where he sees all his memories flashing by. When he comes to, he wakes up in a super colorful field of flowers, totally confused. That's when he sees a much younger version of Euphoria running toward him, asking if he's okay. She reaches out her hand in that sweet way, saying the forest is dangerous and they need to hold hands. Will is still trying to process everything, but Euphoria smiles and tells him she'll protect him. Back in the real world, Julius goes to confront Saradin. It's already been 4 days and Will hasn't opened his eyes for even a second. The teacher calmly explains that the boy is deeply immersed in his own dreams, in the middle of the process of remembering his past. Julius asks if remembering old stuff is really going to give him this new power, and even Saradin admits she's not sure, since the whole sword thing is Finn's specialty. She defends herself by saying she doesn't want to go against his methods, but when it comes to mastering the skies, she believes there are other ways. She draws. The story fills their bodies, just like the marks between sword and wand. And to understand that, Will needs to follow those marks back in time all the way to the beginning. While she waits, Will stays in the dream, noticing how small his hands and feet are. Euphoria is tiny too, and soon it clicks. They've turned back into children. He wonders if he's traveled through time and if the teacher's magic can do that, but quickly dismisses it because as impressive as her magic is, nobody actually travels to the past. In other words, he's just reliving everything in a super realistic dream. Alfaria tries to get his attention, loses her patience, jumps on him, and demands that he look at her. With a sad look, she asks if he was thinking about another girl since he's always so nice to Claire and everyone else. Will denies it, saying he was just helping the priest, but Alfaria yells that she won't forgive him if there's any cheating. The scene makes Will remember that she was even more demanding back then. He asks what he needs to do to be forgiven, and she asks for a hug. Will obeys right away and gently pats her head, feeling a heavy wave of nostalgia, because back then she always found a way to be comforted like that. Calmer now, Alfaria grabs his hand and pulls him deeper into the woods, saying she's recharged with Will's energy and now they can go defeat monsters. Will gets nervous and asks what she means by that. Alfaria explains that there's a rumor. A weird monster is causing trouble for the priest in the woods, and they need to do something about it. Will protests, saying it's dangerous and that he can't even use magic. Suddenly, he realizes he's repeating the exact same words from the past, just on autopilot. Alfaria tells him to relax and shows that she brought their favorite book, saying that just holding it already gives her courage, so she's sure everything will work out. After all, she's going to protect him. At that moment, Will remembers that his past self was a real scaredy cat, and that's why Alfaria always took the lead. That makes him wonder when the tables turned, so he decides to dive headfirst into the dream to find out. Alfaria leads him through the woods, crossing rivers with her magic. After a while, she takes a break and uses Snow Malace, the second spell she invented. It's a gentle spell that's only good for making ice sweets. Will happily accepts the treat, and she asks him to keep it a secret from Claire and the others. She says she's given him the treat because he always shares his food with everyone at the orphanage, and then jokes that if he eats enough, somehow he'll be full of her. Then she decides to read the book, saying they need to focus on positive energy before the adventure. Will remembers the book, The Adventures of Dame, Alfaria's favorite, the story that made them promise to watch the sunset together. She reads the part where the witch says that the Crimson Treasure, the most beautiful in the world, is all a lie. But the hero replies that the sky was just in a bad mood, draws his sword, cuts through the gray sky, and reveals the most beautiful red of all. Will remembers the story, but when he looks at the illustration, he notices that the hero looks a lot like Finn. Alfaria says that the witch cried, enchanted by a sunset that no treasure could ever surpass, and Will convinces himself it must all just be in his head. Soon, Alfaria notices he's fallen asleep, puts the book away, and lets him use her lap as a pillow. Will accepts, enjoying the peace and feeling a huge longing to go back to that time. While he's sleeping on her lap, Alfaria starts leaning slowly toward him. Will is confused because he doesn't remember this and has no idea what she's trying to do. He panics when he realizes Alfaria is about to kiss him, but right at that moment, he wakes up with a start. She jumps back, totally flustered. He gives an awkward smile and asks what she was doing. And Alfaria, nervous, makes up a lame excuse that there was a bug on his face. Will realizes she's acting weird, but she changes the subject, grabs his hand, and says it's time to go save the forest. Now that he knows what happened that day, Will has no idea how he's going to look her in the eye, but for now he just sweeps it under the rug. But then things take a turn. As they go deeper into the forest, the colorful world starts to get dense and gloomy. Alfaria mentions that there's a war going on in a place called Rear Garden, and that bad people and monsters are fleeing from there into the forest. That's when Will's memory clicks. 10 years ago, the two of them went alone into the forest behind the orphanage, even though the director had forbidden it. Will knew he wasn't supposed to be there, but he trusted Alfaria completely, thinking she could handle anything. He's sure about the conversation, but what happened after that is a big blur. The dream starts to break down, the colors fade, and everything turns black and white. The colors only come crashing back when a monster suddenly attacks him out of nowhere, a creature that looked like a wolf with a crystal embedded in its body. Alfaria thinks it's a crystal monster, but Will realizes it's a creature created by mages that's wounded, maybe a fugitive from the war. The beast doesn't give him any time to think. As soon as it roars, Alfaria charges in to protect Will, shouting that she's going to finish it off because she created an amazing spell. She uses Ars Clonus, creating several clones of herself, and announces with all the confidence in the world that they're going to win. Will is blown away, realizing that she's been using multiple spells since she was a kid, which just makes him think she's even more extraordinary. But the dream keeps getting more distorted, and he feels a tightness in his chest, even with all her confidence. Elfaria and her clones prepare a heavy attack, but as soon as they fire, the ice spears freeze in midair against an invisible barrier. Will yells at her to run, but before she can take a step, all the spears are reflected back. The clones are destroyed in the blink of an eye, and one of the spears pierces Will's abdomen. It hits him. The creature has the ability to reflect magic. Even hurt, Will begs her to run, but Elfaria is in shock, pointing her wand at the monster and trying to convince herself she's not afraid, because she's going to defeat the creature and protect Will. Will is paralyzed, and frustration hits hard when he realizes he can't move, and that it's all his fault Elfaria's in this situation. That cowardly and useless version of himself, the one who always needed to be saved, was what he hated most. He pushes himself, finds strength he didn't know he had, and runs toward her just as she casts another spell, throwing himself in front of her to be a human shield against her own reflected magic. An ice spear tears through his back. Another hits his arm. Elfaria screams in horror and begs him to stay with her because she doesn't want him to die. At that moment, Will recalls the memory. He protected Elfaria and then blacked out. But something doesn't add up. How did they survive? Who saved Elfaria? Out of nowhere, the image of a mysterious witch appears in his vision, calling him to wake up. An intense light starts shining from the wounds on his back, and Will's body heats up so much it feels like he's about to explode. That's when the big truth is revealed. He's turning into a sword, and this adventure was the origin of that power. Elfaria is in shock, but Will's body moves on its own and creates an ice sword charged with her own magic, the same magic he absorbs from the spear. It's the first time he uses Wiz, and with a single clean strike, he cuts the monster's arm off. The monster suddenly stops its attack. In the middle of the fight, Will finally understands why he thought this power was unbeatable. He knew the power that Elfaria had created, and now he wielded that energy as a magic sword. Elfaria jumps to his side, and the two of them start fighting together. The scene becomes colorful again, as if the last piece of the puzzle had finally fallen into place. Combining their strength, they defeat the monster and end up back in the flower field from the beginning of the dream. Elfaria gives him that smile and says, "This is your magic." And even though he was unconscious when she said that in the past, now Will knows that was his true beginning, a deep bond with Elfaria that he'll never forget. And so he finally opens his eyes and returns to reality. The first thing he sees is Julius freaking out with worry, demanding they hurry, and pointing out that he was out cold for 6 whole days. Julius frantically warns him that the second blooming is about to start and that there's not a second to lose. Will is still a bit out of it, trying to process the weight of the dream. Julius loses his patience and asks if he's listening or if he needs a punch to snap back to reality. Tsurugi, as calm as ever, asks if he understood the true nature of the power inside him and if he thinks he can remember the paths he walked. Will flashes a confident smile and says straight up that he can access it whenever he wants. In other words, he's totally ready for the second bloomin'. With the course set, Julius tosses in the uniform, and Sarah Dewey gives the final command. She tells Will to go out there and write a new story. In a flashback, Euphoria remembers when she said she hated the mage Venende. Will was obsessed with her, like he was under a spell, while she just waited in the tower. This makes her feel really sorry for him. Euphoria comments that the word enchanted doesn't even really describe the situation. Because of the curse she cast, Will suffered various physical and mental wounds. She wonders how many times he cried, and thinks she should have stayed away. But then we see that actually that was a letter and Will is the one replying. He says exactly the opposite. He's the one who feels bad for leaving her alone and hates his own incompetence. When she sees that Will wants to stay by her side and fulfill their childhood promise, Euphoria can't help but smile. She decides to stay strong and wait as long as it takes. Later, she met with Sarah Dewey, calling her the Master of Mages, to beg her to help Will. Even though Euphoria has pulled some strings behind the scenes, she knows the boy is doing everything he can to catch up to her. What she wants most in this world is to be able to help him. But now we see that it's Colette saying this to Ignal, repeating what could be Euphoria's thoughts. She's annoyed because she also wants to help Will. Ignal points out that they don't seem to realize how serious the problem is, since they snuck out of the tower right after joining a faction. But Colette doesn't care about the consequences. She just wants to be with Will. Meanwhile, Liana is falling asleep. When they ask her what's wrong, she says it's nothing. She just escaped from the tower no matter what, but she can't handle the exhaustion and ends up collapsing. Ignol tells everyone that the Cauldron Witch, or rather the Hammer Witch, came to the rescue, so Will is in good hands. Leanna, however, can only worry because the Hammer Witch shows up in the Academy's Dark Legends. Colette takes the opportunity to call Ignol out, saying he isn't fooling anyone because he himself went to see Will in the tower and ended up getting kicked out. He asks her to stop making things up, but Colette reveals that Claire told her everything. At that moment, Cyan joins the conversation and says he seriously doubts they should do anything. The group asks if he didn't come along with them precisely because he was worried too. Cyan makes it clear that he's only there to keep them from doing anything crazy. He tells it like it is. Will made it to the tower even with everyone saying it was impossible. He shed blood to overcome the obstacles. That's why Cyan knows they just need to wait, because nothing is going to stop that kid. Besides, it would be a huge dishonor for Will to be rescued at this point in the game. And he's not saying this as a mage, but as a man. The boys agree. And now we see that during the second blooming, Emma receives the blessing of the wind. Crocs, on the other hand, is eager to see Will fail. Little by little, everyone starts joining a faction. Mike joins the Darkness faction, and Lyral and Gordon join Zeal's Fire faction. Crocs comments that even though they're short on people, they're really lower in the bar. Leonor fires back that everyone has improved a lot since the attack on Terminalia. Zeal makes it clear to Crocs that he's nothing but a clown. Cario comments that the fear of not surviving is a great teacher because it turns an innocent little bird into a creature that rules the skies. Claire asks if they should already end the second blooming. The big problem is that Will and Julia still haven't arrived. Crocs takes the opportunity and says he really doubts they should keep waiting since it's just a waste of time. In his mind, those incompetents ran away in desperation because they couldn't pass the test. Claire gets furious since the director is a shameless guy who tried to sabotage them. Ecstatic because he thinks he got rid of Will, Crocs announces that the Higher Institute will take care of those two. He asks Euphoria if she has any objections, but notices that she's praying. Suddenly, Julius and Will arrive at the blooming. Everyone cheers and Crocs is fuming with rage. Without wasting any time, he throws the same test at Will again, assuming everyone agrees. Julius gets a little worried. They still haven't tested if Will can control Wiz, so he plans to help him in secret. The plan fails when he receives Euphoria's blessing. Julius asks why, since he didn't do anything. Euphoria just thanks him for helping Will and says that now it's time to believe in him. With no choice, he goes with Euphoria but tells Will not to throw away everything they've done for him. Will is more confident than ever. Ceridwen comments that she used her magic to open a path for his sword and now hopes he'll show the new world that only he can reach. Will envisions a book, flips through his memories, and by gathering everything together, activates the Wiz, the Alaris Wiz. Crocs is shocked to see his plans go down the drain and wonders how the boy managed to activate that on his own. Will gets ready to finish off the monsters, but then we go into a flashback. In it, Will mentions that Elferia cast a spell on him, but of course it wasn't a curse. She captivated him with the magic of a promise. She might feel bad for not helping, but the truth is, she never stopped giving him things and was always his greatest source of courage. Now he wants to shine to show just how much all of this means. Back in the present, with a single strike, he takes out the monster. Everyone is left speechless by the power. Even though it's not as strong as when he absorbs magic from others, the sword still has destructive power equal to an intermediate spell. The Regil are totally hyped and Elfaria goes wild with joy. Elsewhere, Finn finds Ceridwen and mentions that he decided to stay out of it and accept the decision to bring Will to the tower, admitting that it worked out really well. He asks if he should call her Ceridwen or Director Cowdray. She replies that with that look, it should be Sadwin. That's when things get interesting. A total reveal. That old lady look and the necklace with the rings were already suspicious. She tells Finn that using the aging spell is a big sacrifice for someone so young. Finn just laughs and asks if she's gonna complain. Ceridwen counters that she wasn't the only one causing mischief behind the scenes, since Finn gave the dwarves a very valuable Wiz Jewel. Finn replies that Will is the new user of the fifth element, so it's only fair to give him a hand. However, the boy still has a long way to go and can't amplify his magical power to rearm himself on his own, but the silver sword will make up for that weakness. Countrin warns that using the Wiz comes at a price that Will couldn't afford, memory loss or his hair turning white. Honestly, a platinum-haired hero look isn't bad at all. Meanwhile, Will keeps putting on a show. Finn wonders if the boy will show the path the witch so desperately wants. Seeing the monster destroyed, Director Crew demands someone's head and yells that this is all absurd. His assistant tells him to calm down. Everyone comments that Will defeated the creature, something he never could have done if he were on the same level as the dwarves. Sion hopes that this will help people understand just how stubborn Will can be. When all the monsters are defeated, the sword returns to normal. Will realizes that the exhaustion at the end is much heavier than he expected, and it's something to use only for a really good reason. Crew, however, doesn't want to accept these tricks as real magic. Claire tells him to stop with the nonsense, but the director insists, suggesting that the sword is an artifact and that they should only allow entry with a wand. They need to enforce the rules. The audience comments that the sword could be considered his wand, and it's an unprecedented case. Alfaria's assistant notes that not even the high mages know what to do, only a mage of N could decide. Since Alfaria and Will are practically family, they're gonna accuse her of favoritism. She thinks she needs to convince another mage of N before Alfaria completely loses her patience. Right then, Zeus stands up and says that at this rate they'll never finish. He asks Will to try to withstand a single attack from him in order to gain approval. Will realizes it's a quick spell, so it's something basic. Alfaria, desperate, yells for Will to get out of there, but Zeus fires. Will realizes there's no way to dodge or defend, and if he takes a direct hit, he'll be reduced to ashes. After the explosion, everyone panics. However, when the smoke clears, the boy managed to withstand the impact. Fan realizes that Will absorbed part of the spell and endured the rest of Zeus's absurd power with his own body. Surviving an attack that couldn't be blocked or avoided is an incredible feat. Zeus laughs excitedly like a madman and announces to everyone that they don't need to see anything else. The boy stayed on his feet after an attack from a Magia event, so they don't need any more proof. Convinced that Will doesn't belong down there, he orders the boy to come up with his blessing. Krog is into a total panic, calling him Great Zeus and begs him not to use that method. Zeus stands next to him and tells Kroos himself to withstand an attack then. The principal is shaking in his boots and ends up swallowing his pride, acknowledging Will's ability. With that settled, Will is granted permission to join a faction. Without thinking twice, Alfaria jumps in to hug him. Her subordinate is dying of embarrassment and Colette is fuming with jealousy. Alfaria apologizes for having her hands tied, but Will says there's nothing to forgive since what's important is that he finally made it to where she was waiting for him. It's a heartwarming moment. Claire comes over and asks which faction Will's gonna join. The boy starts to say he'll choose Elf, but Zeus butts in and tells him to forget it because that kid belongs to him now. Alfaria is outraged, calling him a barbaric thief and homewrecker. Will tries to calm things down, but Zeus zaps her. Every time Will tries to choose Elf, he gets zapped. When he passes out, Zeus acts like he doesn't know what's going on. Oh, you want to join my faction? Then let's do it. Colette thinks that's crazy and her friend says they're fighting over Will. Hearing that, Colette says her faction should join the competition too. Of course, Colette, we all know why. Alfaria is fuming with rage. Zeus, with that big grin, says the boy is coming with him and no rule can stop him. He takes what he wants and it would be weird not to take him by force. All the girls think he's a real brute, but Alfaria makes her message loud and clear. She won't hand Will over to anyone, and she'll take down anyone who dares to get in her way. We start off with a pretty intense flashback, where Seal corners Aaron, pressing a spear to his neck and demanding to know why dwarves aren't allowed into the tower, even though they're super useful. Incendia stepped in, saying that dwarves are a race without the gift of magic, but Seal called it like it is. That doesn't make them useless. And if they were given the freedom to clear out the dungeon, everyone would see that he's right. To him, it's their silly pride that keeps them from using that strength, so he's going to take the lead himself, since dooming the world by not using every option is just stupid. He asks if Aaron is hiding any other reason, but the old man says his lips are sealed and Seal turns his back and leaves. Eleanor mocks him, asking if all he can do is bark and back down when he doesn't get what he wants, but he retorts that she heard it herself. What the elder said means that the right time hasn't come yet. Eleanor admits that Seal is a brute, but he has an insane instinct, and not even the highest authority could control a beast like that. Sometime later, Incendia scolds Seal for having crossed the line, but he turns the tables. He says he's the one who should be scolding them, because if no one acts, it'll be the end of everything. For Seal, if reason and order get in the way, it's better to throw everything out the window and forget the rigid principles of a mage. Incendia asks him to behave, but Seal sums it up in one sentence: do you want it or not? She thinks his outlook is irresponsible, but deep down, she's jealous. The problem is, a stubborn person with colossal power becomes a threat. As long as Feel's on their side, everything is peaceful. But if Torsius Fok, the Lord of Lightning's wand, becomes an enemy, the damage is massive. Back to the present, the anticipation is through the roof. Euphoria isn't going to give up Will and suggests settling it with a fight. Whoever wins gets the boy. Claire panics and asks if no one is going to stop the two of them, but Incendia says there's no point in even trying. Euphoria orders her clones to get Will to safety with her secretary and watches everything with a look of pure fury. She asks what the signal is to start, and Seal, confident, says there is no signal. Just come at me if you have the guts. Urena turns into chaos. Euphoria summons her giant ice castle and charges straight at Seal. The fight has barely started and it's already at maximum intensity. Seal fires a mass destruction laser beam, but Euphoria dodges and goes on the attack with a battalion of clones surrounding the guy. Julius is left speechless by so many clones, and Sarissa explains that she summoned them all the moment she created the cathedral. Inside the tower, Euphoria is the fastest with spells and the most ruthless. She unleashes Arena ice spikes without even casting and still uses double spells through her clones. At long range, Euphoria is a beast, but so is her opponent. Seal warns that the fun is over. In the blink of an eye, he appears behind her, grabs the girl's head, and uses his magic to wipe out several clones at once. But when he attacks the last one, he realizes that the real Euphoria is hiding way up high. All that was just a distraction so she could gain altitude and prepare her real attack, keeping Seal busy with the clones while she stayed hidden. With a smile, Euphoria asks if he's having fun playing with dolls. She connects the clones, forms a magic circle, and unleashes a devastating attack. The stands are hit, but the people from the Darkness faction put up a barrier to protect everyone. After the impact, the guy appears smiling and says that playing with dolls doesn't satisfy him. Euphoria gets scared when she sees him pulling out the spear. With a leap, he appears behind her and lands a direct hit to put her in her place once and for all. He throws the girl to the ground and moves at an insane speed, landing a brutal blow to her ribs and sending the poor thing flying straight into her own castle. Sarissa panics when she sees the beating. Seal, excited, says the boy is his and unleashes a brutal burst of magical power. Colette wonders if Seal uses enchantments for close combat, but they explain that he doesn't. He's just firing off pure energy. Will confirms it, since Seal is the goal that everyone in the Lightning faction dreams of reaching. Because he's connected to a constant spell, he just needs to project his magical power outward, turning destructive attacks into super simple moves. This technique, which terrifies anyone, is called Spark, and it's faster than Euphoria spells. Seal transforms his spear into an ice hammer. Euphoria tries to defend herself by attacking, but the guy charges forward like nothing happened. She has no choice but to run away while Seal chases her around the arena, having the time of his life. Finn comments that Euphoria is a genius in theory for having created 12 spells, but when it comes to actual combat, Seal is the master. Little by little, he destroys all her clones, and Euphoria starts getting exhausted. Finn tells it like it is. After Aaron, Seal was the one who went deepest into the dungeon, reaching the 48th floor. Even though he's a mage, he acts like a swordsman. And to be honest, it would be much better for Will to go with Seal. Incendia agrees that we already have a winner, but Eleanor looks pretty annoyed. Turns out she already lost to Euphoria once, just because ice magic was allowed. She doesn't want her rival to lose to Seal, but she also doesn't want her to win. Those are some pretty mixed feelings. In the arena, Euphoria is getting totally beaten up. Julius, desperate, begs Will to wake up because his voice is the only thing that can give her the strength she needs. Will, almost fainting, manages to say her name. And would you believe it? She hears him. In that moment, something inside her awakens. Seal goes in for the finishing blow, but in a split second, Euphoria creates an ice field so fast it cuts his face. With fire in her eyes, she warns that Will belongs to her and she's not giving him up to anyone. Seal bursts out laughing and says it's the first time he's ever seen the girl so angry. He asks what turned her into such a beast. And the answer is love. She says that Will always protected her when they were kids and gave everything he had to catch up to her. Now it's her turn to keep the promise. Seal asks to see this power of love in action and charges at her at insane speed with the spark. But at the last second, Euphoria freezes him completely. The guy is shocked and asks what kind of magic that is. She reveals her hidden trick, but the cost is extremely high. She used up half her magical power to activate this in a specific area and was only able to set the trap by firing spells in every direction. Those high-level attacks were just the setup to create the barrier. She already knew she'd be cornered and prepared everything in advance. Eleanor remembers that she used the same tactic against her. This trick even freezes the enemy's magic, and the closer you are to her, the more you freeze. Euphoria admits that she created this specifically so she could hug Will, who always ran away from her. And since Seal forced her to use it, he better be ready. Seal doesn't give up, but Euphoria lands a massive blow, declaring that for richer or poorer, will be hers forever, until death do them part. The impact sends Seal flying all the way to the bleachers. Will opens his eyes, still a bit dazed, but the fight isn't over yet.
At that moment, Seal's voice echoes throughout the arena. He starts casting a spell, and Enchadia realizes that things just got really serious. Eleanor gets extremely irritated. Since Euphoria's barrier can even freeze the enemy's magic, the only way to break it is by using a magical power stronger than the one cast. In other words, Seal's power level is absurdly higher. She tells Lafia and Phoebes to take action. In the arena, a black smoke filled with lightning covers the scene, and everyone freezes because an effect like that can only mean a supreme level spell. Euphoria also starts conjuring her ice structure. Lafia and Phoebes notice that Seal is using parallel chanting. In other words, he had the audacity to use the elves' sacred techniques. One by one, Euphoria's clones are destroyed, but they keep chanting the spell as they go. Julius realizes that Euphoria is using concatenated chanting, taking advantage of her clones to cast spells non-stop, a technique she learned fighting the Grand Duke. Meanwhile, Will wakes up and can't understand the reason behind all this fighting. From Seal's dark clouds, a gigantic claw emerges. It's do or die time. Euphoria summons a majestic ice phoenix, while Seal brings a brutal minotaur into the battle. Seeing the scale of the disaster, Will yells at Euphoria to stop, but he can't even finish his sentence. The supreme creatures charge straight at each other, and Phoebes and Lafia raise a super barrier to keep everything from blowing up. But the energy is so strong that you can feel the impact even from outside the tower. Edward and Warner immediately realize it's the work of the Magia Vander, those mages who don't know how to take it easy. Back in the tower, Will runs desperately, worried about Alfaria. And look at that, both she and Zeus ended up tied. Zeus gets up and, even with almost no magic left, decides to keep going. Alfaria does the same. They charge at each other, ready to settle things with their fists. But at the last second, Eleanor and Cariote step in and say that's enough. Alfaria tells Eleanor to get out of the way. Zeus also tells Cariote to move, but he says it's already too late and that it's their own fault for dragging out the fight so long. That's when the Sun King shows up in person, warning that he won't tolerate any more fights between the Supreme Wands. Alfaria stands her ground, saying she won't stop until they decide who gets to keep Will. Zeus tells the old man to leave and says that since they're out of magic, they'll settle it with their fists. Everyone waits in suspense for the Sun King's reaction, until, as calm as can be, he says, "Settle this with rock, paper, scissors." Everyone is left speechless while Finn bursts out laughing. The old man says it has to be this way, because if they use any other method, Will be under his command, and he starts counting. Zeus and Alfaria call the guy every name in the book, but they don't waste any time and start playing to see who gets the boy. Will can't even believe what's happening and asks Julius to explain what's going on, but Julius refuses, saying that all of this is Will's own fault. Feel the drama. They spend ages playing. You can tell they're pros, because if it were me, I would have lost right away. And after about 299 games and 299 ties, Zeus finally wins. Alfaria starts to panic because this means she'll have to be separated from her sweetheart. Will tries to comfort his friend, but Zeus cuts him off, saying that now he's on his team and can't complain. Alfaria throws a fit, insisting they're not taking her Will away. She doesn't want to be separated again. Will looks at her and totally gets it, since Alfaria has been alone ever since she arrived at the tower. She waited for him for 6 years, and even though Will would also rather stay with her, he has to follow the rules. Still, he offers some comforting words, promising that even in another faction, he'll come visit her. Alfaria tries to hold back her tears, but Sarisa shows up and drags her away, reminding her that the orders of the Sun King are absolute, even if she has to take her by force. While Alfaria kicks and screams, Will is left feeling sad. Zeus comments that he actually took it pretty well, thinking Will would have resisted more. Will replies that if he had protested, Alfaria would have ended up hurt in yet another fight. That's why he makes Zeus promise not to fight her again. If he breaks that promise, Will himself will defeat him and run away with her. Zeus bursts out laughing, says he likes that attitude, gives the boy his blessing, and officially welcomes him as a member of the Lightning faction. Julius finally breathes a sigh of relief. Sometime later, the group is at the witch's secret base throwing a party, since everyone in the group got into the tower and no one was left out. Emma, a bit nervous, asks if they're really allowed to make so much noise. Everyone reassures her,
saying they're free to do whatever they want until the seminar the next day. Even so, she stays reserved, saying they're from different factions and she doesn't want to hang out with rivals. Then Rosa comes over and tells it like it is. She says her friend isn't fooling anyone and that she's dying to have some fun. Meanwhile, Leanna is really tired. Will, worried, asks what's wrong, and she explains that it's just accumulated fatigue from the past few days. She says he'll understand soon enough since he also joined the Lightning faction. Will is afraid to ask more, so he just offers her some food instead, and Leanna accepts right away. Then Julius shows up complaining, telling Will that because of him, when he went to comfort Miss Alfaria, she suddenly started yelling that she didn't want to be a Vandermage anymore and ran off, causing a huge commotion for the group to handle. Will immediately apologizes. Julius calms down a bit and gives him his glasses back. Will thanks him, and then Colette, clearly curious, asks since when those two have been getting along so well. Will thinks she's mad, but Ignal spills the beans. She's actually jealous because she didn't expect a friendship to start up between Will and Julius while she wasn't paying attention. Julius yells that there's no friendship starting at all, but he turns completely red. Colette tries to play it cool, and Julius decides to leave, saying he's not going to join in on this little friendship game. The other boys go after Julius, and Ignal suggests they should go too, since this invitation is a sign that they like Will. Will agrees and goes along, but Colette is left feeling sad in the corner. She admits that Emma was right. She can't have Will all to herself anymore, and it hurts not being able to spend as much time by his side. Ignal says that putting yourself down isn't going to get you anywhere. He says he's tired of waiting, but that doesn't mean he's given up. He decided to go after the person he likes on his own, something he learned from Will. Lehana joins the conversation and says that being afraid and wanting to run away is also a way to discover your own courage. Colette, a bit nervous, admits that there's something she needs to tell Will. Lehana gives her a little pep talk, but as soon as Colette steps out of the room, the nerves hit and she completely freezes. The group thinks about helping, but decides to wait. Elsewhere, Julius walks up to Sion and asks why he looks so grumpy. Looking over at Will, he throws out a jab. He asks if it's because he doesn't have anyone left to mess with. But Sion replies that he doesn't need that anymore because Will was never really a victim. Even though Will still tests his patience, he doesn't bother him anymore. Will notices the two of them there and goes over to thank Sion for everything he did at the festival and at graduation. He asks if they can spend some time together so he can properly thank him, but Sion just smiles and says if he really wants to show his gratitude, he should just fight him, summoning his guardian right then as a reward. Julius doesn't want to be left out, so he summons his own guardians too, and says it's time for Will to pay back the training debt. While chaos is breaking out, Colette finally gathers her courage. She throws the door open and runs toward Will to confess her feelings. But Sion and Julius charge at Will at the exact same moment, and the result is a massive explosion in poor Claire's house. Meanwhile, Iris decides not to go to the party, thinking her presence would only confuse everyone, and she can't let Will find out her true identity. At that moment, Finn shows up saying she's focusing on the wrong thing. If she keeps pretending to be just a younger classmate, someone else was going to come along and steal her guy. Iris tells him to stop popping up out of nowhere, and Finn, laughing, says he just wanted to give her some support. She calls him by his real name and asks him to make her a promise. He asks her to just use the name Finn, and she agrees. Iris remembers that Will is now an official member, so she asks Finn not to take him away. Finn agrees to the deal and says he'll just watch from a distance out of respect for her. But the warning stands. If Will doesn't grow as a sword, he'll take him. Iris trusts his judgment. After all, they're doing all this to surpass the heavens. Back at the party, which is turned into chaos, Warner shows up and kills the vibe. He asks what all that mess is about, reminding them that they're elite mages and should behave themselves. He tells everyone not to get too relaxed, speaking as their superior. Then he pulls Will aside and congratulates him for overcoming the trial. Will jokes that Warner already congratulated him way too much at graduation and that Warner cried more than he did. The professor gets embarrassed, and Will takes the chance to ask if he can visit Euphoria. Warner says that mages from different factions aren't allowed to visit each other, but he makes an exception, telling Will to go change so they can sneak out for a bit. While they're flying on the dragon, Edward watches and comments about the favoritism, but Lisa asks him to let the professor spoil the boy a little. Claire feels nostalgic and remembers that this is how they used to have fun in the past. Warner gives the boy until midnight. Will arrives at the square and finds Euphoria, who jumps on him, complaining that he sided with Zell. Will remembers that he lost the game and admits he wanted to go with her, but questions if that was really their goal. He recalls the promise to become Maja Vander and watch the sunset together. He says he's still not worthy to stand by her side because he needs to become much stronger. Wistoria pouts and lies down on his lap. Will remembers when they were kids and asks what she was trying to do when she got close to his face while he was sleeping. She blushes all over and denies any mischief or attempt to kiss him, saying she's not as forward as Colette. Will then reveals that he started regaining his memory thanks to Iris and that he wants to recover what he lost. Wistoria, blushing and calling him ambitious, decides to forgive him and asks if they can go look at the sky together. When they reach the top of some icy stairs hidden by an illusion, Will confides that it hurts to think that the beautiful sky is fake, since on the other side are the celestial invaders. Wistoria agrees, saying that their promise will be the hardest in the world, but together, they'll fulfill it. The next day, back at the tower, the group tries to guess what will happen at the seminar. Claire comes in, congratulates everyone for being the generation of adversity full of potential. But then comes the bombshell. She hands them a confidential mission of utmost importance. Their job now is to investigate the very factions that recruited them. Julius is in shock. Claire recalls the tragedy at the festival and warns them that they found evidence someone inside the tower is pulling the strings. There is one or more traitors among them, and the group's mission is to find out who they are. And that's how the second season of this spectacular anime ends. My rating for the season is a solid 10. The fights were insane. There were moments to cry, moments to warm your heart, and lots of comedy. The highlight was seeing Will with that transformation. It honestly gave me chills. And watching how the classmates who used to hate him ended up forming a strong bond with him was amazing. And with this sense of a job well done, we wrap up the last episode of this story. This journey delivered everything: incredible battles, moments of pure emotion, and fantastic character development. But our adventure doesn't stop here. With the new anime season just around the corner, I have a very important announcement. Our upcoming releases will be posted directly on our backup channel. Thank you so much for following this series all the way to the end. Big hugs, take care, and I'll see you in the next video over on the backup channel. Thanks! Rebobina says goodbye. See you next time.